Chairman Solomon will ask, actually it should be a blue raise hand, and then also you can raise it down. Also, you want to mute while other people are speaking, and then you can unmute when you are ready to speak. And then also, one of the things, since this is COVID-19, we have to, per the governor, we have to do a roll call vote for any motions during the meeting.
I don't see a blue raise hand thing, so.
Neither do I.
If you click on, if you put your cursor over the top of the meeting where everyone's picture is appearing, there'll be an icon there for participants. And if you click on that, it should open up a panel to the right and have a raise hand button.
Oh, okay. Off to the very right.
Yeah, got it.
Did everyone see that, Steve? Did you find that?
No.
I see the list of everybody.
And then at the bottom?
Oh, and then you have to go down to the bottom 3 dots and then click on raise hand.
Yes.
Can the host see my
Jason, your hand's up right now.
Okay.
And I think actually if you go onto your picture, you can actually, I think it has the icons there. Does it show there? Because I know it shows on
There
mine.
are 3 dots on your picture.
I do not see raise hand there.
You know what you can do as an alternative? You can go to reactions and thumbs up, if nothing else.
Okay.
Will that suffice?
If it's not working and the thumbs up isn't great, then you could just raise your hand physically, and I'm sure we'll work it out that way.
Exactly.
Of course, I don't know how to get rid of the thumbs up, but I'm still happy about something.
I would leave it there, but it does look like you're being punched.
Steven, to the left of the clap hands, click to the left of it. It's a blank that takes out the thumbs up. There you go.
There you go. Okay, Chairman
We're
Solomon,
ready to go
we're ready to
then?
go.
Okay, we'll call the meeting of the Redondo Beach Budget and Finance Commission for May 28th, 2020 to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Chun.
Here.
Commissioner Samples.
Here.
Commissioner Woodham.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Nugent.
Here.
Commissioner Conroy.
Here.
And Councilmember Solomon.
Oh, I've been promoted. Present.
Oh, sorry. Chairman Solomon.
Thank you, Eleanor. We will do a salute to the flag. We could all stand and I'll go ahead and get it started. Again, pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic,
which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. As City Clerk Manzano mentioned to us, we will be doing all roll call votes. So do we have a motion to approve tonight's order of agenda?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
All right, and let's have a roll call vote to approve the order of agenda, please.
Commissioner Chun.
Aye.
Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Nugent.
Aye.
Commissioner Conroy.
Aye.
And Chairman Solomon.
Aye. Thank you. We also do have...
Forgot Commissioner Chun.
Oh. Commissioner Chung, that was the first one. Okay.
Aye.
And I believe you called on Commissioner Nguyen, Eleanor? Commissioner Nguyen? Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you did.
Yes,
Okay.
I did. Oh, man. Okay,
Thank you.
sorry.
We have one, do have a blue folder item tonight. We have the one blue folder item. Can we get a motion? Do we need a motion to enter the blue folder item into the record?
We have 2 blue folder items.
2 blue folder items?
Yes, we have the budget response reports and public communication
Okay.
for J1.
So So can we get a motion to enter the blue folder items into the record?
So moved.
Receive and file.
Receive and file, thank you. And we had a second?
Second.
Can we please have a roll call vote?
Okay, I'm gonna make this quick, so I'm gonna do just last name. Chun,
Aye.
Samples,
Aye.
Woodham,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Nugent,
Here. Aye.
Conroy,
Aye.
and Chairman Solomon.
Aye. I don't see any items on the consent calendar for approval. I don't believe that we have any. Can we get a motion to approve the affidavit of posting for the meeting? Would someone like to make that motion, please?
So moved.
So moved.
Can we have a second?
I think we had the second.
Yeah, a second. Great. Thank you. Let's go ahead and have a roll call vote to approve the order of agenda. Excuse me, affidavit of posting.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, and just a reminder that during each area, each item, we have to ask for public comment. Of course, we don't have any e-comments for this one.
Okay, thank you.
So, Chun,
Aye.
Samples,
Aye.
Woodham,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Nugent,
Aye.
Conroy,
Aye.
Chairman Solomon.
Aye. Thank you. We have excluded consent calendar. We don't have any items on the excluded consent calendar, nor comments for that,
No
which
comments.
would move us to public participation on non-agenda items.
Do we have any?
This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any subject that does not appear on the agenda for this action. The section is limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker is afforded 3 minutes to address the commission. Each speaker is permitted to speak only once. Written requests, if any, will be considered first under this section. Non-agenda comments would be listed here for the e-comment section. Do we have any non-agenda comments, please?
No, Chairman Solomon, we have no e-comments.
Okay, Commissioner Samples has his hand raised. Commissioner
Yes,
Samples.
I should have asked this earlier. I'm curious. We're conducting this conference on Zoom, and we can see who are direct participants. Is this also being broadcast anywhere, or are there other viewers that can observe our meeting?
Yes, so on Spectrum Cable, on Channel 8, it's broadcasting, Frontier Communications, Channel 41, and it's also streaming online you can go to redondo.org/RBTV. We also have it on YouTube, and I think that's it.
Okay, we're not able to determine who's actually viewing this, but there may well be viewers out there.
Correct.
Okay.
We have it live.
Thank you.
It's live broadcasting and streaming.
Great.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. We don't have any items continued from previous agendas. We don't have old business, which brings us to our items for discussion for new business, item J1. Marnie, Joe, if you could please let us know how you wanted to handle it, if there's going to be a presentation or we're going to go into the questions submitted by the commissioners, how you would like to proceed there, please. You're muted, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good evening. I've got some introductory remarks. We've got a PowerPoint, and then if all right with you, we'll go into the question that many of you provided in advance, kind of use that as the format of the meeting. And if that sounds all right, that's kind of the approach that we'll take tonight. So
I think that sounds great. Thank you.
So I'll kick it off. Good afternoon, commissioners. It's been a while since I've been before you, but you're meeting at an unprecedented time in the city's history. I don't need to tell you that. It's unfortunately a time of financial crisis for the state of California, for our nation, and for the city as well. The state is facing a budget shortfall of $54 billion. It's a time of great concern about the city's finances, And you know from the budget message and the articles that we as a city are facing a general fund budget shortfall close to $9 million. So it's a very big financial hole that we find ourselves in. This is for the budget year that begins July 1st. There are also budget challenges for the current fiscal year, but I think our focus tonight will mainly be the proposed operating budget for the next fiscal year. It was on May 16th, in accordance with the requirements of the city's charter, that I issued the proposed fiscal year 2021 operating and capital budgets. You know, a number of other cities actually passed the issuance of their budget the date back a week. We did not have that luxury because the date is set in the charter approved by the voters. We were, I believe, the first city in the South Bay to release its proposed budget for the coming year. Shortly after it was released, I believe Marnie sent you a link. I believe you probably have a hard copy of both budgets as well. So it's been out in the public domain for about 10 days, a little bit over 10 days. We've had one budget workshop beginning of the public hearing process with the council that happened Tuesday night. Hopefully some of you were able to tune in. It was a 6-hour meeting. And basically the format of that meeting was after a high-level budget overview, we went through the decision packages and the council asked questions and heard from the departments on each of those suggested changes to the budget. I had asked Marnie to reach out to you to get questions in advance of this meeting in order for the staff to be most effective in addressing your questions, your concerns as we begin your review of the budget. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll go directly to those questions. Certainly, you can ask other questions besides those that were given to us in advance. We do appreciate that opportunity. It helps us be more prepared. I think it helps us be more effective in responding to issues. Before getting into the proposed budget, I want to talk about your interaction with city staff and the finance director in particular. Part of my job as city manager is to protect city employees from what we refer to as a hostile work environment. While all of you are free to express your concerns and your opinions, it cannot be in a way that's accusatory or represents a hostile attack on the finance director. At a recent meeting, one of you accused the finance director of, quote, trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes, unquote. If you know Marnie at all, you'll know that she's an extremely hardworking and honest employee. Pulling the wool over your eyes is never her approach. Marnie has raised concerns to me about the interaction of some of you with her during these meetings. For tonight, please know that Marnie will be free to leave the meeting if she feels that a hostile work environment has been created due to your questions or comments. We do value your input. We want to hear from you. We want to have a successful meeting here, but I can't allow accusations of this nature to go unanswered. With that, I want to turn it over to Marnie to do this presentation. And with that, Marnie, take it away.
Okay, so I'll share my screen with the PowerPoint. You should be seeing it. So as you know, we're here tonight to talk about the 2021 budget. You have both the budget and the CIP. We have, it's based on the budget process, which establishes funding priorities in accordance with the core values of the city and the financial principles, as well as the strategic plan. And then the core values are listed here. So making up the operating budget document, first comes the city manager's budget message, which kind of gives an overview of what's in the budget and what's to come in the coming year. It has the core budget, that is all the schedules that you see, and revenues and expenditures and departmental expenditures, all that. The core budget is primarily the prior year's budget with appropriations that were one-time in nature previously taken out. And then anything to change that core budget are in decision packages. So that might increase the budget, it might decrease the budget. Of course, this year it is almost exclusively decreasing the amount of the budget to bring us in balance. The decision packages are located at the end of the city manager's budget message. And this year there are 46 decision packages. We have started our budget response report process that we do each year. Questions are asked by council and answers are given in the form of budget response reports. So one of your blue folder items tonight was the first three. So as you can tell, we've just started. As we go along in the budget process with City Council, they will be getting new budget response reports for each meeting. And chances are they'll have several in the agenda packet and then probably even more blue folder. So each time they're made available, I'll make sure that I send those off to you as well. So you are kept up to speed with those. Just the real high level summary of the budget in the numbers. Before decision packages, the core general fund is at 96.7 million, while the CIP budget, both new projects and carryover projects, is about 58 million. Our general fund reserve, which all of the schedules are after the general fund reserve. So where you start with a beginning balance of 0 in the general fund, that doesn't mean it's really negative 8.1. It means it's already been taken out and we're left with 0 beyond the general fund reserve. This year, a lot of the decision packages deauthorize positions. So starting the process, we are budgeted for 432 full-time employees. And if all decision packages are adopted, we'll be at 398 full-time employees. All that with the shortfalls in revenue this year, we are showing an $8.9 million deficit before the decision packages, and then those decision packages bring us into balance to 0. The decision packages, there's 46 of them. The non-safety departments have been asked to make 15% cuts to their budget, and safety departments, together with the prosecution division of the city attorney's office, they were asked for 5% reductions. There are 26 vacant or projected to be vacant positions being deauthorized or defunded, and 9 filled positions. Some of the decision packages include internal service fund allocation modifications. Those would be to the IT equipment replacement fund and the vehicle equipment replacement fund. We are using grants to not have to increase the budget. We have a couple of those. We'll get into them more as we go through the document and your questions. And then, like I said, the budget is balanced to 0 with the use of transfers. A transfer from the capital projects fund, and then making up the final amount is a transfer from the major facilities reconstruction fund. And then you'll see quite a few decision packages, not only reducing the general fund, but reducing the harbor funds as well, because they are facing structural deficits as well. Budget response reports, we talked about those briefly. So they've been issued. The one was, our budget response report number 1 is always for corrections, and we have no corrections yet. The other 2, one gives comparative staffing levels, comparisons with surrounding cities, and also comparisons with our own city in prior years. And then there is a budget response report about alternative budget balancing measures. So if council does not want to adopt all of the recommended decision packages, these alternatives are available as well. They could do these instead of what they're not wanting to do in the decision packages. We feel that this budget response report might be expanded as we listen to council and get your input as well over the adoption process. So that one may grow. Coming budget response reports are some of them include harbor patrol operations. So several of you had questions about the decision package on harbor patrol operations. And so I'm going to kind of punt that one for tonight. And the fire chief is writing a budget response report that I'm hopeful will answer all your questions. There'll be one that talks about structural deficit. There'll be one we do each year on CalPERS and their rate increases. At mid-year, we expanded that to funding options, how we could reduce the amount that we either have to pay currently or the amount that we have outstanding as a liability. And this year we'll add on to it because CalPERS has had some recent investment losses. We'll be adding what we see happening to those rates because of those losses. Then we always have budget response reports giving more detail about the vehicle replacements and the IT equipment replacements. This year, of course, those budget response reports will include descriptions on how things are changing, because there's the decision packages to either partially fund the allocations or hold off for a year, which delays the replacement. So those budget response reports will describe all that. We will attempt a 5-year financial scenarios report. Of course, everything I'm hearing, webinars galore, of course, because of all that's happening to municipal budgets. The big word is that nobody knows what or when, but we'll attempt to project some scenarios there. And then, of course, one of them will be commission feedback. So we'll talk at the end of the meeting about your options for providing that feedback. But council has specifically asked for your feedback on the budget and the Harbor Commission's feedback. So those will be provided in budget response reports. Our budget calendar. So we are already just by the listing halfway through. We have released the budget. Well, actually, this even goes back to the mid-year budget, which then immediately changed with the COVID crisis. So we did a budget update in April for the council. As Joe talked about, we released the budget on May 16th. May 19th, City Council got a real high-level overview of the budget and then set the public hearing for this to start this past Tuesday with their budget workshop. Tonight we're at your commission meeting. Harbor Commission meets on Monday. Council's back to it every Tuesday between now and the budget's adoption. And you get one more take it at the budget on June 11th. And then our recommendation is to discuss and possibly act on the proposed budget and the CIP. The way I see that happening could be any one of 3 ways. You could wait until your second meeting to provide feedback to the council, or you could provide feedback both times. That feedback could come in the way of a letter, which doing everything remotely might be a little more difficult than it has been previously, but still possible. Or as we've done sometimes, I can just write a budget response report and list out your feedback, of course, running that by you before making that final. And so with that.
Excuse me just a moment, please, Marty. I just want to clarify, please.
Sure.
When all this started kicking off, we had the June 11th meeting canceled tentatively. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, the June 11th meeting now, at this point in time, would be held.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. So I can start going through. I was going to go through the budget kind of by page where you submitted questions. So the first questions came in on the second page of the city manager's message. So Commissioner Johnson had asked about staffing reductions with, can we get an overview of the city employees temporarily furloughed due to the crisis? Not looking for the dollars, just want to understand the impact to which employees. For example, the libraries are closed, presuming the employees are furloughed. With temporary defunding of 26 positions that are mostly vacant and a few shifts, is it correct the actual layoffs are 2 employees? And Chairman Solomon had asked, okay, I'm going to find it here. Was there a discussion of furlough versus layoff for those employees affected? So as far as the staffing reductions, they're just the deauthorizations or defunding for 1 year in the case of fire has been recommended, not furloughs. But if you look at the budget response report with the alternatives, in there is the alternative to do or a pay reduction. Most of the city's part-time staffing works with the recreation programs, including those for the seniors, and then for the library. Since neither of those are currently operating, the part-time employees are not working for us. They, just depending on how things come back to normal and what normal is, they may be hired back or they may not be. Time will tell how that works out. All of the full-time staffing reductions recommended are recommended as ongoing. So would not be just this 1 year, except for those in the fire department. Their bargaining group requires more meet and confer than the other bargaining groups. So theirs is for just 1 time. Of course, council can reauthorize just as easily as it authorizes. Of course, they would need available budget to do that. As listed in the letter, 26 of the positions authorized are vacant or projected to be vacant by July 1st. Another 5 will transfer to somewhere other than their current position within the city. 2 will go from full-time status to part-time, and our part-time is unbenefited, and then 2 would be laid off.
Excuse me, Marnie?
Yeah.
Does the 26 defunded or vacant positions, does that represent the entirety of the vacant positions within the city, or can you tell us, please, how many total vacant positions we have in the city?
Oh, I do not have that in front of me, but it would be the general fund vacant positions. No department's going to offer up a filled position as a cut if they have a vacant one available.
Okay.
But some vacant positions that are funded by restricted funds, those, and again, I don't have the number of those, but they can remain as vacant. We do have I guess we could call it a soft hiring freeze, where even those positions would have to be approved by the city manager to be filled before the department can proceed with a recruitment.
Okay, so we may have some vacant positions that are not defunded or deauthorized for the next fiscal year, but those
Right.
would be specifically get authorized by the city manager to fill and may be funded by special funds rather than the general fund.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's the case. What comes to mind is some, vacancies or soon to be vacant positions in the police department. The police department, that's an area where we would continue with hiring. But again, we've got 3 vacant positions that we're proposing for deauthorization. I think generally speaking, there aren't hardly any vacant positions in the organization that are general fund positions that will be left if all these decision packages are adopted. And as Marty indicated, there are, give you an example, there is a vacant position in the transit fund. The transit fund is completely separate from the general fund. There's no general fund money that goes to the transit fund. But one of the individuals that's being laid off in the general fund is likely to move to a similar position in the transit fund. So technically it's a layoff, but the person has a place to land in the transit fund. So, there's not the same financial pressure there. It's a dedicated source of funding that continues. So you'll see some examples of things like that happening where, we really tried to not displace anyone as part of this balancing the budget, but it was just really unavoidable in order to make the kind of cuts that were needed to bring us back towards structural balance. We'll get into this. We are not at structural balance. It's a step towards structural balance. One of the things the council may opt to do is they may opt to make some of these reductions one time as opposed to permanent. But if they make them one time, it would be basically they would come back into the core budget this time next year as we go through the budget process. If we've got the funding, no problem. If we don't have the funding, and the other thing too, there's just so much uncertainty related to this budget concerning, is there a second wave? Is there a third wave of COVID-19? And nobody really knows at this point. Most of the stuff that I read indicates that there will be a second wave. I am unfortunately reading more and more reports that say that it could be worse than what we've dealt with, what we're dealing with now. So, there is just so much uncertainty that governs this. We've made virtually all of the cuts permanent in nature, thinking that we're going to have budget problems for some time because we rely so much on travel, tourism, leisure services. When you think about, all of the financial pressure that households have now, not sure how much travel there's going to be over the course of the next year and beyond. So we want to be hopeful, we want to be positive, but we want to be realistic. So
would it be fair to say, Joe, that the assumptions that the consultants have provided us and the assumptions that the staff is working on are based upon the current wave of virus rather than a potential second or third wave? Or have you gone ahead and projected out to include a second or third wave?
Well, we haven't projected a second or third wave. What we're projecting is that gradual recovery. This is based on, and we'll get into this, projections from our sales tax and TOT revenue consultant. But, they really don't know. And, that's why we're really, cautioning against mass gatherings. That's why we're taking the public health orders seriously. Everybody wants to get back to opening, but at the same time, nobody wants a spread of the virus. So, but no, that's a good question. In terms of kind of what the assumptions are.
What our assumptions are. Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Conroy has a question, please.
Thank you. And you know, it wasn't long ago we were talking about the savings we were going to get by hiring more police officers. It was going to reduce the overtime that we were paying out. Now that we're taking the other option of having this soft hiring freeze for police and fire, I'm wondering, are the savings that are listed here going to be offset partially or completely by increased overtime?
So we'll get to that a bit later when it comes to fire. But there are some things written into that decision package, or actually the two decision packages put together that help with that issue. So we're trying to mitigate it.
Yeah, and then what I would say is that on the police side, we can count the savings as ongoing. We don't see by deauthorizing the police positions that's going to, we're going to have to do extra overtime shifts in order to service the community. On the fire side, unless we're able to negotiate with the firefighters union a change to the minimal staffing that's built into their labor agreement, the savings are not going to be, we're not going to be able to really count those savings unless we're able to put in place a change to the minimal staffing. So this, on the fire side, it's the start of a process. We're in labor negotiations right now with the Firefighters Association. Their labor agreement expires July 1st. We're in active discussions and negotiations with them. We're on a journey with them. We'll see, do we wind up with agreement with them as part of a labor package that will enable us to implement these recommendations or some variation of these recommendations, or are we going a different route? So there's probably more questions than answers in terms of the fire side at this point. We're going to need a little time to let those negotiations and discussions occur.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Marnie, if you wanted to move on with the questions.
Okay, then we have several questions related to just the next section of the budget message on the COVID-19 revenue losses. So Chairman Solomon had asked these questions. The reported sales tax decrease is at 11.9%. Did this come from a consultant or a staff derivative of consultants' earlier reports? Estimated at 67.2% or 5.8 million cut in TOT. At our March 12th meeting, the estimate was 125,000. Where did this figure come from? Do we have a report from the Redondo bid? Reports on occupancies projected from somewhere? Those were there. And Commissioner Samples had questions related to it as what steps are planned to further adjust for the shortfall, and let's see. Realizing that within the last month, Council has been asked to approve nearly 500,000 in pending contracts, including 115,000 in continuing support of the CAD system that was replaced in 2018. Exactly what has been done to limit current spending. And 5% of approximately 60% of the budget is 3% of the budget. 15% of 30% is approximately 4.5%. Total is 7.5% if all targets are met. And basically, what is the plan to handle the difference? And then Commissioner Chun had asked, what are the considerations for the budget 2021 if revenue deteriorates further from the 8.1 million or 8.4% to 10%, 15%, or 20%? At what lowered revenue point would furloughs, layoffs, or severe cut in services be taken into consideration? So as we go through these points, so we came to you in March when nobody had any idea how big this COVID crisis would become. And our world changed drastically immediately after that. So we did an update for the City Council in April. And although Council was not asked to take any action at that time, so they didn't formally readjust the budget, they were just made aware of the situation and let them be prepared when we come at year end. And instead of having this excess fund balance, we actually have a deficit, and they'll be asked to address that then, probably mostly from the CalPERS Reserve Fund. If you'll notice going through the budget here, as in previous years, there's been a recommendation for a transfer from the PERS Reserve Fund. There isn't in this budget because we're expecting that to have to happen at year end. In this paragraph in the city manager's message, the fiscal year 2019-20 or our current year, there is projected a $5.1 million revenue loss. That's made up of 1.1 million of sales tax, 2.9 million of TOT, and 1.1 million of other revenues. Then for fiscal year 2021, or the budgeted year here, the $8.1 million revenue loss is made up of $1.3 million in sales tax. Here's our huge jump, 5.9 million of TOT and 900,000 to other revenue. Most everything has been completely shut down for this last quarter of fiscal year 19-20. And it's looking like some things will be open before the beginning of the fiscal year of July 1. So as Joe mentioned, we're not looking for everything to return to normal July 1, including our revenues. We do anticipate some revenues coming back as opposed to the nearly no revenues in this last quarter of the fiscal year. Our sales tax projections, those came from our consultant, HDL. We were first given more optimistic projections and said, you know, the way we're reading it, this looks a bit too optimistic. And so sent him back to rework, and at that time HDL, they were telling us they were having practically daily meetings trying to figure out what was going to be happening and coming to a consensus on how to make the projections. So he came back with the numbers that we're using now. in speaking with the finance directors of the other beach cities, they are all using HDL for their sales tax projections as well. And they relayed that they had exactly the same scenario happen with their projections. Our TOT projections, we do those ourselves, but we did run them by all the hotels who were at the bid meeting. I believe that was in, had to be late April, early May, something like that. Hoping they would say, no, that it's not going to be that bad, but they didn't. They said, yeah, it's looking like that's probably what's going to happen. So generally, we're expecting about 50% of the revenues we were getting previously for TOT. That's not 50% for the whole year. That's less in the beginning of the year and more at the end of the year, but averaging out to 50%.
Marnie, when they were talking to you about what's going on, if and when they do reopen, were they going to be doing the discounting, which would continue to suppress that figure, and so that would otherwise also impact the total number?
Yeah, so we did our estimates based on their previous revenues and took a percentage of that, as opposed to looking at just their occupancy. Because yes, no doubt they're going to try to get higher occupancy by lowering their room rates.
Right. So
for the short term. So
yeah, our ADR is going to go down, even if our occupancies go up. It may not compensate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And also, just to clarify, the health order did not shut hotels. We've had some hotels shut down on their own because occupancy was so low. The Portofino is shut down. The Redondo Beach Hotel is shut down. But the Marine Avenue hotels have continued to operate. They were a bright spot for them was in March when they had a booking of 100 rooms. It was the National Guard that was in the area. So we look for whatever bright points that we can get in this crisis. But hotels can be open. Their restaurants cannot be open. They can be open for room service. I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Commissioner Samples has a question, please.
Yeah.
Yes, just to clarify on both sales tax and TOT, our actual recognition of revenue is delayed some period of time after they actually start doing work and start charging people, correct?
Yeah, so sales tax is a quarter behind.
Okay.
And TOT is a month behind.
Okay.
But then when we get down to the end of the year, those revenues that we receive within 60 days of the end of the fiscal year still get recorded back to this current year. So
right.
We, especially TOT, their remittance for June will get recorded in 2019-20.
Right. I was just thinking about it in terms of cash flow and
Right.
how that works. So,
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So continuing on TOT, then the one other thing we had to take into consideration was the Marine Avenue hotels, where we have a financing arrangement with them, where we have a reserve. And that reserve, while they're experiencing such difficult times, is being drawn upon. And so our TOT is going to have to go back to them to replenish that reserve. So we are super, super thankful that I'm thinking a couple years ago, maybe a little bit longer, we were able to reduce that reserve amount from 8 million to 3 million. Because if we were replenishing an $8 million reserve, that would probably be years. So, but with that in mind, we're really not projecting any revenue from the Marine Avenue Hotel. So that's why you're seeing a bigger drop than just 50%.
Marnie, excuse me, can you elaborate on that a little bit? A lot of people may not know what the reserve arrangement you're describing is.
Yeah, even our city attorney was describing it the other day as the most complicated there is out there. But generally, to get the hotels constructed, they took out loans for the construction. Those loans are still out there. To get the loans approved by the banks. They put up a reserve that the bank holds on to, and we did as well. Ours was just, we didn't have to write a check for the whole amount. It was just built up over time with their TOT revenue. Once it reached the reserve level they wanted to see, then we got to keep all of the TOT revenue. So now that that reserve is being drawn on, we're having to replenish it again.
And we replenish that from TOT funds or from our general fund? From TOT.
TOT, and specifically their TOT.
Great.
So it only gets replenished as quickly as their TOT comes in.
Great. Thank you for explaining that.
Sure. So in light of all these revenue losses, the departments are being really careful with their spending, even in the current year. None of those contracts approved by the City Council in the last month were for new items or new services. They were all continuing existing services. And then as far as, well, what if we have still been too optimistic? Basically, we would have to take even more cuts since we are getting to balance at 0. There is nothing to spare without making more cuts or transferring more funds. So whereas right now we're looking at giving council the option of adopting the recommended decision packages or using some of these alternatives. If things got worse, it would require both. We'd have to do both the alternatives and the decision packages. Let's see, next question. Commissioner Johnson asked about the CalPERS $1.5 million savings and what portion of that is the cities and what portion is the employees. And I didn't get the question in time to get an answer from our HR director. So we'll pick that up next month then. I'll have an answer in time for that.
Okay, thanks, Marty.
Sure. And then Commissioner Samples asked about the questions that I had asked, read earlier about the shortfall, what we're going to do about that. So on page Roman numeral 4 of the budget message, is that where? I'm sorry, it's Roman numeral 5, where we talk about transfers. In order to get the budget in balance, we did have to do transfers. So there's a transfer from the Capital Projects Fund. As you might recall, the Capital Projects Fund has no real revenue source of its own. It gets its primary funding from the general fund if there are sufficient funds at year end. Typically $1 million a year. If there's more available, council often opts to transfer more that way. So this is a take back of those funds from the Capital Projects Fund. We were fortunate this year that those unrestricted funds could be replenished thanks to our Community Financing Authority. So we had a bond issue for as far back as when Gallery was called the South Bay Center. We had a South Bay Center bond issue that was really two bond issues where the Financing Authority bought the Redevelopment Agency's bonds. And so that has all changed with the dissolution of the Redevelopment Agency, and now with the Financing Authority bonds having matured. So those Redevelopment Agency bonds, we're still getting the funding from the successor agency, and we're supposed to, the way the agreements were drawn up, we're supposed to still make those payments, and had the attorneys look at it, and the attorneys determined that that funding could then be used for capital projects and only capital projects. So that worked out well, where we'll be able to supplant this money being taken back by the general fund. Then the balance to get us to zero is being taken from the Major Facilities Replacement Fund. That one's there to build up over time for a facility that may need to be replaced in the future. So taking a little under 250,000 still leaves 920,000. Not that it was enough to replace a facility at its current level, anyways.
Marnie, Commissioner Woodham has a question, please.
Yeah.
Marnie, I want to go back to the CalPERS issue. I had been looking at a schedule of the increased payments to CalPERS for the losses in the fund. And the answer you gave just a moment ago piqued an interest. Is it true that some of those increased payments come from the employees, or I had assumed they all came from Redondo Beach?
So Redondo Beach writes the check, of course, but PERS, they really have three pieces to it now. They have the employer cost, and they have the unfunded liability amount, and then there's also an employee portion that is based on normal cost. That employee portion for years and years and years was paid by the city, and most cities did that. As we've been bargaining with the various groups in recent years, how the city has worked it out where the employees are paying some or all of that employee portion.
So but the employee portion would normally be what percent of that unfunded liability payment? The issue is
So it's a third piece. The unfunded liability is the city's sole responsibility. The employer portion is the city's sole responsibility, but then there's an employee portion.
Okay, but the unfunded liability you said is totally the city's portion.
Yep.
Okay, got it. And that's the issue that's an issue that we should be discussing at some point, because over the next 10 years, that figure comes up to as high as $8.5 or $9 million at the end of the period. So that's going to will be a major issue at some point. So I was just curious, because I thought I understood you to say that the employees paid a portion of that. I'm glad you clarified it. Thanks.
Yeah.
So that brings a question up, maybe not to be addressed at this time, but to pin somewhere. When we're talking about layoffs and asking people to leave their positions, do we consider asking people for early retirements or consider buyouts in an effort to perhaps reduce our future unfunded liabilities or our current payroll demands?
So we have not opted for that at this point. In talking to other cities, some are, some aren't. It's just kind of a preference, but
we have not offered that as, to employees. PERS, has had programs that you could buy the employees an extra year or 2 years or more of service credit as an incentive to retire. We have not done that. It's very expensive, as you might imagine. The one employee in finance is at a point in terms of service credit where there is the opportunity to retire. She doesn't have to retire, but that employee is at a point where the cities will continue to provide employee-only health insurance until the employee reaches age 65. That's kind of part of our CalPERS health program. The other employee, unfortunately, is a more recent hire in community services, is not at retirement age. And so the thing about the retirement incentives, when they're offered, they can't just be offered to targeted individual employees. It
has to be global.
It's got to be global, and then you don't know who's. And so anyway, so we haven't gone that route. I haven't, in my weekly discussions with city managers, I've not heard of any city in the South Bay, Marnie may be aware of one, that is going that direction. So I just wanted to offer that.
Okay. Yeah, Santa Monica did, and, was definitely in the papers for it.
Well, I saw the mayor being interviewed about it.
Yep.
Commissioner Woodham, you still have your hand up. Do you have additional questions?
No, I didn't think I didn't mean to have my hand up.
That's all right. Commissioner Samples had your hand up. Commissioner Samples, do you have a question?
No, thank you. Mr. Vefgren answered my question in the course of his comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next question in that section of the city manager's letter, what is the city doing to pursue any grant opportunities to offset the shortfall? So, of course, the city is looking for grant opportunities all the time. CIP is the biggest user of grants. If you look at page Roman numeral 12 of the 5-year CIP, you can see that $1,995,000 of the 2021 projects are funded by grants. And that's in addition to the use of the other restricted funds that you see there. So CIP, like I said, is the biggest user of grants. Additionally, for the operating budget, there's 2 new grants this coming year. One is for about $150,000, and that's for an enhanced response to crimes committed by people experiencing homelessness. So that grant will be used by police department and city attorney's office to run those programs. And then there's another $310,000 grant that'll be used by the Community Development Department for some of its projects. So we give it every shot we can. Police department typically comes during the year, all year long, with new grants they find. Community services does the same with some of theirs. So, and then of course, with the COVID funding, we're seeing a little bit of that becoming available in addition to just FEMA reimbursements. So we try to make good use of those.
Excuse me, Marnie, Commissioner Samples has a question, please.
Yeah.
So thank you, Marnie. Actually, I guess I didn't phrase the question very well. I know that we get a lot of grant funds for our capital improvement projects, and I was really trying to hone in on the operating budget and what we're doing. It seems like the police department is very active, and we know that there are a lot of new grants or new opportunities that seem to be cropping up. And I guess the question was really kind of going to the idea of, is there a coordinated effort within the city? I know that there have been some fire grants. Most of them are directed at rural agencies, but some of them are at municipal agencies, and other grants that are out there COVID related. And I wanted to get a feel for how active we're trying to be in capturing some of that money. I think my experience says that if we're not really aggressive, it all gets glommed onto by the county and the state, and municipal agencies like ours end up with nothing. So that was kind of my question.
Yeah, and we'll be doing a budget response report on that as well, on the FEMA and other opportunities out there for
okay. Thank you.
There.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also add that one thing completely separate from our budget is the Police Foundation. That is a separate organization that is opted to fund certain, additional items for the police department in the interests of policing. So that's a new kind of opportunity to help, support the police department. We have state and federal lobbyists. The state lobbyist in particular was very effective for us in the past year, related to getting language in the state park bond. That was a competitive process that our staff was able to secure the largest grant out of that park bond, close to a $5 million grant to buy a portion of the AES site. Unfortunately, that requires a willing seller, and that's a whole different story. So we're trying to salvage that grant. We'll see if we're able to. But yeah, most of the grant funds that are out there are not for ongoing operations, as you know. One of the things that's been, a lot of discussion has been the funding that's gone out through the federal actions to support relief efforts. Cities that had a population of 500,000 and above received a direct allocation. The county and city of LA received, major allocations. There's discussions underway about, hey, there's 88 cities in LA County. We as a city have got no direct allocation. So we didn't obviously bank any revenue there. Anything we get will be gravy, but we're not holding our breath. Let's put it that way. So That's a good question.
We've already touched on it, but Chairman Solomon has asked, has CalPERS indicated when we will be asked for increased contributions based on investment losses, and that's in fiscal year 22-23 that we'll see the impact of those losses, and our stab at it using a tool, an online tool that CalPERS has. We will plug in either a -1 or a 0% investment rate for this year, and see what it generates as far as what our payments will look like.
So when we fund the or defund a vacant position, is there a corresponding decrease in a payment to CalPERS for that, or deauthorize a position? Is there a corresponding decrease in our CalPERS obligation, or because that person is not actually earning a salary, it's no impact?
So our normal cost payments for the employee and the employer portion, those both get reduced, you know, if we weren't paying anyways for a vacant position, but if it's somebody that we were paying for and we're no longer paying, we pretty much realize an immediate impact from that. But as far as our future rates, our unfunded liability, that takes at least 2 years to see the results of that. But yeah, eventually it helps.
Okay, and are overtime costs or payments PERSable?
No, they're not.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Chairman Solomon also asked about decision packages in general. Let's see if I can find it.
I have it handy if you like.
Yeah, I was going to go to the cuts. You had a question about, oh, I think it was, okay, if I paraphrase, it was,
of course.
did the departments meet their targets for the cuts? So as we said before, the non-safety departments were asked to make cuts of 15%, and the safety departments for 5%. The calculation was made on the 2021 core budget for personnel and maintenance and operations. And most departments, their cuts did meet that level. There's a few that came up a little bit short, but on the other side of that, there were a couple that actually exceeded that. So we came out to where we needed to be. Then we can move on to the
Mr. Solomon, you're muted. We didn't hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Joe. The other question was, did the departments meet their goal? And if not, what or who perhaps didn't meet their goal or came close? And you answered that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Chun has his hand raised. Marnie, Commissioner Chun.
Yeah, one question. It's along the lines of TLT and then on the revenue. Just the rents. There's no discussion on the rents. I know from my understanding, some of the rents have been postponed, but what's your sense in terms of rents, given that on the budget, it's pretty much the same from 2019 and 2021, and if there's bankruptcies or businesses don't come back? How do you get that estimate?
Most of our rents are from the, that are impacted, like you said, are from the harbor area. And so we'll get to those when we get to the harbor decision packages.
Great.
The general fund ones, you know, those come from, you know, land at the Marine Avenue, hotel sites, cell towers, things like that, where it's not based on a business being open. The general fund ones. On to decision packages. We had a question from Commissioner Samples for decision package number 2. 20,000 a month sounds excessive on the community services department office building rent increase. What is being done to reduce this cost immediately? So we are in an agreement that it is high. We do have a contract to pay this amount. But as it says in the decision package, there is a capital improvement project for the coming fiscal year that will look at relocation options and see if we can't do away with that lease payment.
And maybe just to add to that, I mean, the history of the community services facility, they previously were located at the school district property at Nob Hill and PCH. That's where they were for years. It was always kind of a rental lease situation. The rent, this was several years ago, was going to increase significantly. Not able to reach agreement with the school district, so that's when community services was relocated to where it's at now on Artesia Boulevard. We had in front of the council earlier, it was within the last few months, it was time for renewal of that lease. And so we have several years left in that lease. I believe it's 4 years at that location. And one of the things that as staffing changes and as services change that are offered by community services, and as we have potentially more capacity at City Hall and the library, we want to do a study to see, is there a way to bring that staffing back here, get out of that lease? We likely would have to buy our way out of that lease unless there's somebody lined up to take our place to pay the landlord even more than we're paying, which is unlikely right now. So, and community services has had different components over the years. Transit was added to community services. You know, I think that was about 6 years ago. It moved from the waterfront department or the harbor department to community services. And so community services typically is the department that no two community service departments are the same from one city to the next. And so there is the potential to have some additional reorganization in the future. And yes, we usually don't put in what the full amount of that rent is, but yes, it's $245,000 a year to rent a facility. Should we really be in the rental business? Good question.
Thanks, Joe. We have a few hands up, please. Commissioner Samples, you had your hand up?
First of all, Joe, thank you so much. I mean, this was just one of those numbers that jumped out at me. It just, And not to pick on community services, but $250,000 a year for rent within our city just sounded like a lot. And I thought it was worth asking the question, especially when the next line item was, oh, and by the way, when other people are deferring rent until next year, we get to pay an extra $4,000. So I thought it was just fair to ask the question, but I do appreciate it. And I guess the only thing I can say, it sounds like you're already working on finding an expeditious way to get out of that. I just appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Nguyen. You're muted right now, Min. You're on mute. There you go.
Okay. All right. Okay, just a quick question on that building on our decision package number 2. So we don't own that building. I thought we always owned it. So we lease it from a third-party landlord? Is that
That's right. Yeah.
the case? Okay. These annual increases, do you know if these are fixed increases or are they like CPI increases each year that we have to pay?
I believe they're CPI type increases.
Okay. Maybe down the road we can kind of see the lease terms on this building. I'd like to see how it compares to the market. $20,000 does sound like a lot. It is a lot, but I'd like to see how the lease looks like to compare it to the market and see where we're at, because that can kind of help us negotiate some type of maybe restructure of the lease. That's it.
Joe, I think when I heard the city council discussing it, did community director LaRock say that's a 22,000 square foot building? Is that right?
Well, that's the size of the lot.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big, it's a big lot, and we've got parking for the employees, and there's, public contact there, at least there was in the past, in terms of people registering for recreation classes, housing programs. There's also a police, not substation, but an office there. And there were a number of tenant improvements that were made at the site at the city's expense when we first moved into the location. It's been a very popular location with, having a city presence in the, on Artesia Boulevard. It's, right adjacent to the North Branch Library. But yeah, in these times, it's definitely something that we want to take a look at.
Commissioner Chun, you had your hand up? Okay. That's all the hands for right now, or questions for right now. Thank you.
Okay, on to decision package number 10. Commissioner Samples asked, please justify how the city attorney can instantly reduce their budget $368,000 from the 3-year average of over $800,000. What was excessive in prior years and what is going to be neglected this year? So I don't know if you were able to watch the city council meeting. The city attorney discussed this decision package, and he can give you way more details and did give to council way more details than I can. But yes, there are going to be neglected things. The decision package calls for a huge reduction in outside counsel for non-litigation matters. The only thing to offset this reduction is in decision package number 35, where there's a recommendation to basically add back $175,000 of this cut for power plant property matters. So knowing that that's a item that city council is extremely interested in, he knows that there's going to be non-litigation matters that would need to be addressed with that. So, yeah, he's not happy, and there will be neglected items.
And the other thing I would add is that the city attorney talked to the council about a reduced reduction. City attorney, we've had very frank discussions. No department is happy to make these reductions. But, the city attorney, being a separate elected official, did participate in our budget discussions, did comply with the request to provide options for the reduction. We did come to an agreement on a reduced amount for the city prosecution. He also talked about applying that 5% to his department in total. So he made that point to the council. He also talked about having a reduced amount and also having it be a one-time reduction, not an ongoing reduction. So that was the discussion the other night. And so I wanted to just kind of provide that extra perspective.
Commissioner Woodham has a question, please.
Yes, a question on legal fees to either Marnie or Joe. What happens, I think I know the answer to this, but let's discuss it anyway. What happens if we have an issue come up that's not anticipated, that does require outside counsel? I assume, depending on the severity of the issue, we'll find the money somewhere to pay that. So this sounds like a reduction that we hope we can affect. But if a legal issue comes up, we probably know ahead of time that we can't save all of that money. Is that correct?
Yep, exactly correct. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
And also it would be covered under the litigation budget, which is separate from this and is a different amount. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have the outside legal counsel portion of the budget. We also have the city attorney staffing. So what's represented in this cut is really kind of the specialty attorneys that are called upon for extra outside expertise. But, we have, talented, capable, knowledgeable attorneys on staff. And so, what he's talked about is that a heavier load would be carried by the staff that remains if this type of a reduction is put in place.
But I assume that some of this request for outside counsel is based upon, as you say, specialty knowledge. So the decision could still be made that even though you'd try to rely on internal staff for this, you might not be able to, depending upon the issue, correct?
Correct. And also when given the option of, if you've got to reduce one place, do you take it on the staff side? Do you take it on the outside counsel side? We opted for the outside counsel side.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So to illuminate, Joe, and correct me where I misstep here, the city attorney has a roster, for lack of a better way of putting it, of resources of outside counsel that he can go to. And if a need arises for outside counsel, then it's my understanding that he approaches the city council in order to state, this is something that we want to engage these people on, and can we do that? Are you asking about process questions there or funding questions?
Well, yeah, there are contracts in place now where if there's a need for outside attorneys with our current budget, there's funding available for that type of work. If they're already under contract, he's able to make use of them. Although for the current fiscal year, we're close to the end, and I know the city attorney has put a stop on spending and use of the outside legal counsel except where absolutely necessary. If there's a need for specialty counsel outside of the contracts and firms that he has in place, every now and then you'll see a new contract come forward where there's a area of specialty with an outside firm that the city attorney gets counsel approval for. So this was an area that the city attorney has strong feelings about, and certainly made his feelings known the other night. And, that's unfortunately where we see ourselves at this point. It's really a choice between, if there's going to be reductions in the attorney's office, is it on the contract side or is it, through displacement of staff?
Thank you. Commissioner Conroy has a question, please.
Yeah, on the subject of the city attorney's office, and looking through the blue folder items, there's a schedule that shows some comparison to some local cities. I see under some local cities, Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, El Segundo, they currently contract their city attorney or contract out for legal counsel. Should we be looking at any potential cost savings for doing something similar, especially based on the fact that we're spending a substantial amount of money on outside legal anyway? And to that point, this shows we currently have 11 full-time employees in the city attorney's office, which is a significant number, and it's only slightly below Torrance at 13. What are your thoughts on that?
So in terms of our structure, the city attorney as an elected official and the way we're structured, that's reflected in the city's charter. So any change to that would require a vote of the people. To my knowledge, that's not been suggested in recent years. I mean, my history is with the city is, close to, I'm going on my 8th year with the city, and that issue, to my knowledge, hasn't arisen during that time. So that's the issue in terms of in-house versus a contract arrangement. That's really governed by the charter and the voters. In terms of the metrics, we many times are asked to provide data, to provide metrics, to provide comparisons. What we did is basically our surrounding agencies, as well as agencies that are used at times during our labor discussions, those are the organizations that you see reflected in some of these comparisons. So it's really just kind of put out there to show on a per capita basis, how we compare overall with our staffing, as well as, looking at staffing from one city to the next.
Just to follow up on the same thing. So I understand as part of the city charter, it's an elected position, and it would be up to a vote of the citizens, but it seems like kind of a cart before the horse thing. Like, how would we know whether, I guess my point is, who's ever going to call for a review and a comparison to see how much our total cost of our city attorney's office is in-house compared to what it would be for contracting, like a lot of our neighboring cities currently do? Who would do that, and what would be the process for making that analysis happen?
Sorry, here. Yeah, so I have not been through that process before in any of the 7 cities that I've worked for. That would be, I would envision at a city council level. That's where sort of the initial studies or discussions would take place. I mean, we have seen in some neighboring cities where it's, there's been some potential changes to the staffing. The city clerk's department, I believe in Hermosa Beach, went from being a separately elected position to being more of an appointed position. So that happened, I believe, in Hermosa Beach. In Torrance, they've had just the opposite, where the question was presented to the voters for the treasurer. And Eleanor, was it the city clerk as well?
Yes, the city clerk, yes, and it didn't pass.
I can't hear you.
Yes, the city clerk.
I believe it was.
Yeah, and so the voters did not, approve that change. And so it's really kind of community by community, what's best for the community, what's most, what provides the highest level of service, and what's most cost effective. I have an excellent working relationship with the city attorney. It's the first city that I've worked in where there was a separately elected city attorney, and quite honestly, wasn't sure when I came here how it was going to be, and it's been an outstanding arrangement. I'm very impressed with Mr. Webb and his skills and abilities and his selection of staff. So from my standpoint, I think it's working well in terms of what we have in place. You asked my opinion, but it's not up to me. I mean, I'm just one person's opinion here, but as someone who works with Mr. Webb on a daily basis and his staff, I feel very good about the level of service provided to the community.
Well, certainly no knock against Mr. Webb and our current city attorney's office. It just seems to me, I mean, that a study at some point, you're saying you've never seen one done or heard of one being done. It might turn out that the current arrangement we have actually saves the city money. But I would think that at some point we'd want to know, again, I see neighboring cities contracting it out. I don't know if, they migrated to that at some point or if they just always been that way and that's the way their charter is. Just seems like something that we would want to know at some point, especially with money being as dear as it is now. But thank you for your response.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't see any other hands raised. If you wanted to move on to the next questions, please, Barney.
Okay, all the way to decision package number 11. The question from Commissioner Samples, how does this affect the phone system replacement approved last year and the other ongoing support of mission critical PD and FD systems? So this replacement life cycle extension for the IT equipment pushes off all equipment replacements. You'll see later in the decision packages, except for the network equipment. That is the one item that the IT director feels cannot be pushed off. So again, from the city council meeting on Tuesday, where the IT director spoke to his decision packages, he is comfortable with pushing all of the equipment, including the phone system, out a year. But he did state that he would not be comfortable pushing it out any more than that. The phone system in particular, we do have a maintenance contract on, and chances are we'll be taking even more advantage of that during the delay than we have been, just because it'll be yet another year older. On to decision package number 13. Commissioner Samples asked, per multiple conversations, there is a gap in procurement practices and contract management. How will these gaps be filled if the positions are eliminated? What is the ongoing financial risk to the city due to skirted procurement practices? So decision package 13 is our financial services department budget reduction. And it does deauthorize an admin analyst in our department. This admin analyst is the one who prepares our budget documents and prepares our internal service fund allocations. It is not the position that oversees the city procurements. So me and my assistant director will be doing more work as far as the budget document and the internal service fund calculations, but we'll be looking to see if there isn't some cost-effective way to get some assistance with those. But we'll check that out and see what there is. But it it won't impact purchasing. Then decision package number 14. Commissioner Samples asked, safety departments were asked to find a 5% budget reduction. With this decision package, the reduction from the requested 2021 budget is 3.5% and still represents a 1% increase over 1920. What justifies this increase and or waiver from the direction of the 5% decrease? So their cuts are not in this decision package alone. They also have decision package number 38 with their reorganization that saves some additional funds. And then decision package number 22 with the budgeting for vacation cash outs. And they are the one of the larger, as you might suspect, cuts seen in that decision package. So with those three decision packages, they do get really close to their 5% amount.
Arnie, with the police department, this is an awkward question, but as part of what they're doing here, are they having sort of a soft freeze on promotions as well, which tend to increase payroll, increase personnel costs, or will people be promoting during the year? Do we know that?
They seldom go a year without, because of course the older employees, those closer to retirement age, are in the higher classifications. And so those in the lower ranks do promote up into those. The cost savings that's described in this decision package assumes that that will happen together with then the officer rank being the one that's left vacant after the promotions are through. And in that officer rank, they would be hiring not lateral, but recruit police officers.
Right.
And those officers, of course, come in at the bottom of the pay scale together with, they would be the PEPRA.
Yeah, tier 2. Right.
So they're going to have lower retirement costs as well.
Okay, thank you. So that's been factored into to that. Thank you.
Yep. Decision package number 15. Commissioner Samples asked, only firefighter base salary is represented in this decision package. Not included are benefits and other costs such as training and equipment. Please justify. How does truck staffing of 3 total personnel meet OSHA and NFPA requirements for safety and appropriate response plans? What is the risk to the public? So the firefighter positions, those costs do include benefits. The only benefit it does not include is the unfunded liability payment to PERS, because we have to make that payment regardless of whether the position is filled or not. It does not take into account equipment, at least to the eye it does not. Fire department, when we started out on this 2021 budget process, had requested equipment for new employees coming in. And so although it's not taken out here, they originally had requested for additional funding for that equipment. And of course, that's not even showing up anywhere. It's not recommended, because if we eliminate the vacant positions, they don't need the equipment for them. And
a question there, please, Mary, from
I
Commissioner.
did ask the question of the fire chief about OSHA and NFPA, and he responded that OSHA has no minimum staffing standards and that NFPA is only advisory, not a regulatory body. So we're not violating any regulations if the number on the truck was reduced.
We have a question, please, Marnie, from Commissioner Samples.
Sure.
Thanks, Marnie. Two things. First of all, the question about salaries was really kind of a math test, because I looked up straight salaries and benefits, not including overtime. We don't have a firefighter in our city that makes less than $100,000 a year. So that's where I got the question at, and that's kind of neither here nor there. My real concern is that between this budget or this decision package and the other one talking about moving some of the staff from Station 3, I'm afraid that our citizens are at risk, number one. Number two, OSHA, NFPA, and everybody that you talk to has a basic policy that's called 2 in and 2 out. And that means that there are supposed to be 2 firefighters. Anytime there are 2 firefighters inside the building or they're in danger, there should be 2 on the outside. This truck company effectively doesn't operate with only 3 people. Effectively, it's no longer a truck company, and we may as well have a pickup truck out on the street because it can't do its job. So those are things that are concerning me about this. And yeah, we might not be violating an OSHA rule, or we might not be violating a quote policy or recommendation from NFPA, but this is just kind of wrong. And I think it needs to be very seriously considered. So that's kind of my place on it. I would like to see the city council spend a lot more time asking serious questions about this decision package.
Okay, well, that's something that when we come back around and make recommendations to the council, we can have as part of the letter or the budget response report or something like that. So
right.
The concern is noted, and we can discuss that, forwarding it as that serious concern you have.
And Marnie, this is no reflection on you. I understand you're just repeating the message that you're getting. I'm not sure that we're getting the clear message. So, but thank you for your response.
Yeah, and then for the dollar amount, remember these are vacant positions, so it's not anybody we're seeing out there who is currently being paid. So.
And Joe, a question, please, because this would change the terms of the MOU. This is a decision package where we would need to work with our firefighters and have them agree to something like this, or is this outside of the MOU and something that the council can adopt?
No, the best scenario would be we have discussions with our firefighters union. It is something that we come to agreement on. That obviously isn't something that happens overnight. There was a meeting actually today, a management labor session that happened. So that's the best path forward. Whether this is something the city could impose, we haven't really looked at that in terms of sort of taking that unilateral action. There's a whole process that goes into that, relating to a negotiations with the association, good faith negotiations required by state law, declaring impasse, the whole process that we went through related to the overtime issue that did not come to a fruition with the city imposing or basically unilaterally taking this action. So yes, you're right. It's why we put it down as a one-time reduction. But there's a whole process that would have to happen. In a way, it's interesting that in order to put reductions in any other department, you don't have that same minimal staffing issue. You don't have it in Public Works. You don't have it in any other department. And to address Mr. Sample's, comment related to the 2 in, 2 out, yes, that is a rule that's in effect when you're entering a building where there's a fire. Unless there's no other option, it's supposed to be 2 firefighters in for officer safety, 2 firefighters outside. But keeping in mind that we've got other agencies around us that don't have ladder trucks with 3 on them, but they've got fire engines with 3 staff members on them. So, but certainly something that you could put in your letter or observations or comments to the council.
Okay.
I don't see a hand, so thank you. Please continue then, Marty.
Yeah. So decision package number 22, Commissioner Johnson had a question. Let's see. Oh, change in accounting for vacation payouts. Can this be explained a bit more? Doesn't feel like a cash savings on the surface. And no, it is not a cash savings. It brings budget more in line with actual expenditures. In previous years, the budget has included a vacation cash out for all full-time employees because their MOUs allow for that. So it's budgeted at the number of hours that their MOU says they can cash out. This decision package changes the methodology from that to taking a look at each and every individual employee, looking at whether or not they have historically taken a cash out as opposed to taking the time off, or are they have such a balance where they're about to reach their maximum balance, and that kind of gives us an indication that then they'll probably cash out. So this takes those 2 things into account and predicts what kind of a cash out expenditure we're going to see and budgets accordingly.
All right, thank you. So the previous process was to take the theoretical possible cash out and treat that as the budgeted amount, and now we're estimating it based upon more likely what we believe it to actually be.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Marty.
Decision package number 23. Commissioner Samples had a question. Based on the city calendar and responsibilities, budget and finance cannot fulfill its role if it is allowed to meet only bi-monthly. This item should be amended as it is minimal in cost with respect to the total budget. So that's not really a question, more of a comment. And again, like the other, I think that's something, if you're all in agreement, you can make that point to the city council and say budget and finance commission should be excluded from the every other month.
Joe, this is a little bit of of an out-of-the-box question about this. I understand that we're having these meetings virtually by governmental order, where the governors, there's special exceptions that are being made in order to do this. Has there been any discussion whereby after the crisis has ended, that certain commission meetings or other public hearings can be held in this manner in order to save money for the city, or has that even been approached or discussed?
I've not heard of this becoming sort of a permanent change allowed by state law. It's a sort of a temporary measure, as I understand it, during the time of kind of this crisis or statewide emergency. One of the, there are hard costs associated with having the monthly meetings, and that is the cost of the minute secretary, the televising and cable casting the meeting. But there's also, the staff time in preparing the reports, in preparing the agenda, attending the meetings. And, Marnie being a management employee, that's, I'm not going to say it's free, but she's not getting overtime for this. But, we've got we've got community services that's supporting, I believe, 4 commissions. And from a standpoint of just being able to adequately staff commissions, I mean, I have worked in other cities where commissions did not have department heads or city staff providing support. It was truly a citizens committee that did its own independent study, that did its own research. I have thrown that out to the council before, that may be an option here. The staff can only be pulled in so many different directions. And so really 2 components to this. One is a cost savings, and the other is, the ability and need for staff to provide support to the different commissions that meet. So anyway, as you know, it was, for years, it was every other month. One of the things, and we'll get to it in a moment, there was a question related to Moss Adams. One of the things that Mark Staranka had mentioned to me is potentially wanting to look at the number of commissions that the city has. Is there overlap? Is there potential for consolidation? And so anyway, that may be another item out there that the council may want us to look at.
It doesn't sound like, because of the staff time and the other associated costs, it's not so much about the meetings being virtual or in person, so much as in having the meetings themselves, and the cost is not greatly reduced by doing it in this manner.
Yeah, I don't think there's any savings other than maybe we're still got the lights on where Eleanor's at, so there's.
Okay.
And now we don't
Nothing's
have
changed.
to bother her during in-person meetings.
Right. Okay. To weigh in, and I imagine all of us can weigh in at some point when we discuss a measure of what we would like to send to the city council. There's such an abundance of information that we sift through on a regular basis. If we did go to every other month, I would hope that during a period of time when we're reviewing budgets, that in, say, April, May, and June, we would have consecutive meetings, or at mid-year, maybe have consecutive meetings, because there is such an abundance of information to process and go through.
And we did that previously when we had every other month meetings. Budget and Finance Commission didn't stick to that every other month. It looked at when the budget processes and financial statement and all of that, when those came about, and looked at those dates as opposed to strictly in every other month.
Okay. Commissioner Chun has a question, please.
Yeah, so what's the estimated hours that staff puts in for all the commissions per month? What can you just give us a ballpark? I mean, over 100? I mean, Because that's a lot of time.
I would say so, probably. Never
Yeah.
done math, but
I don't know, Eleanor, you've looked at this and in the past, right, in terms of the.
Yeah, I would have to go
Whoops,
back to
we
my
can't hear
record.
you.
I would have to go back into the records. You still can't hear me? Oh, that's really interesting. Okay,
You're
hold
still
on.
muted, Eleanor?
Yeah.
Hold on, we gotta do something.
Okay.
push a different button.
No, we still cannot hear you.
I don't know what happened. No?
Can Vicky say something? And then
No,
maybe can you go to her
she's, let me
mic?
go over there and see. She's all right. Let's see. Doug, do you know why they can't hear me?
Mr. Chun asked a question that has broken the internet.
So would it be right to say that if there was less hours that staff would, I mean, it would be a lot better for staff in some sense? I mean, aside from just the meetings, right? I mean, it would ease the burden on staff.
That's weird.
Definitely.
Yeah, so what I just heard from one of our staff members viewing is that Eleanor can be heard on TV. It's just we can't hear you
Oh,
through the computer.
I'm not sure what happened.
Well, it sounds like the question is trying to get an estimate of what the real cost savings would be by doing that. So we have the reduction of the commissioners meeting. It looks like an ongoing savings of $36,600. That would include staff time and all of the other associated costs, or is that limited to a staff time charge?
Those are just the hard costs, as I understand.
Okay, not including staff time.
Yeah, those are the things that we receive bills for. So that's the minute secretary, that's a direct charge, that's the cost of the individual who's, in the control booth, cable casting this meeting. We would have to do some calculations to come up kind of with the soft cost, which is the staff time. And I'm advancing this one this year just because with these reductions, all the department heads are going to be working harder than they have in the past. They're going to be covering more things than they have. And, if there's any way to reduce either the number of commissions or the number of meetings, to me, it's kind of an issue for productivity and for really morale for the staff. Just a lot of hours, a lot of extra hours they're working.
I'll find a sensitive balance of providing maximum input for the community with the volunteers on the commissions and the issues that are raised on the commissions and the staff time and the hard costs of it in a really tough time. Commissioner Samples has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, when I looked at this and I saw the $36,000 number, realizing that we've got some 18 or 19 commissions, I looked at this as we've got 2 commissions that are carved out, and I believe that the work that we've been doing has been really important. And based on the city's financial calendar, meeting less than once a month is very difficult. If the number is bigger than 36,000, then it's certainly something that's worth a deeper look. But when I saw that, that's why I asked the question. But I appreciate the additional information because it now makes a little bit more sense.
Commissioner Conroy has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to say if the primary concern and cost relates to staff time, and this decision package were adopted, would we as a body be able to meet on those other months without staff participation?
Yes, so if they were to adopt this budget package as it's written, so the monies would be not available for the minute secretary as well as the cable casting every month. There would only be monies there to do that every other month. We not gone the direction of, having meetings, without cable cast, without webcasting. So that, I don't know of any city that's kind of going that direction. I also don't know of a city where, although I've worked for a city for a number of years, where at the beginning of the meeting, the chair says, okay, which commissioner is going to do the minutes this time? They all look at each other and somebody puts their hand up and they become action minutes. Again, that's not ideal, but you know, when times are tough, I mean, that's a way to still have a meeting and avoid those costs of a minute secretary. I know it's asking a lot for someone. I mean, can they really meaningfully participate in the meeting while they're doing the minutes? But so it would, if you were going to meet, it would be kind of with a change to either the webcasting and cable casting, or who does the minutes.
Would there also, though, Joe, there'd also be staff time pulled for creating the agenda, the posting of the agenda, and then there would be some associated hard costs if we met in council chambers or the library or what other public venue would be held.
Right. You've got those kind of indirect costs, but I mean, what's reflected here are really just the minutes as well as the cable casting.
Correct. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you are.
Yeah, I guess
Thank
it was
you.
muted inside the video room. Not sure why.
We kept it going until we could hear from you.
So, yeah, well, pretty much what the city manager mentioned. But I'd have to look at this, the soft cost, the Excel spreadsheets in my office. But I can't remember how many hours, but I have something like that. So if, you know, you want a budget response report, I can provide that. So,
Well, that might be one thing that we, if it's the wish of the commission at the end of our discussions, whether it be tonight or at the next meeting, can weigh in on the decision package 22 to have us ask for the council or have the council ask for a budget response report illuminating further the costs associated with that. So that would be something that the council would have to ask for, Joe, correct, as a budget response report, or will we be able to ask for that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally it would be the council members asking for it. You know, we've got, I think at the last budget on Tuesday, we received 14 budget response reports that we're working feverishly on. We're trying to get them done so that they don't show up on June 16th, when we're adopting the budget. So we're going to get some included for this coming Tuesday, both in the packet as well as blue folder. So at some point, we're going to put our hand up and say, Uncle, we can't keep up.
The irony of asking for a budget response report about staff time, creating extra staff time to get a budget response report.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. If you wanted to move to the next question, please, Marty.
Okay, let's go to decision package number 24, where Chairman Solomon had a question about the call for an end to feed waivers. Does this include free use of North Branch Library for groups like NRBBA or Perry Park for senior groups? So this decision package is in regards to fee waiver events. So the 1920 budget, those events were the Super Bowl run, Spring Fest, the Summer Festival, the Holiday Stroll, 4th of July, Los Angeles Kings run, Halloween Trick or Treat, the Holiday Boat Parade, and the Seafair. And so those are the ones that this is in reference to. It's not the use of city facilities. But there is a budget response report on the way. Council requested one of their 14 from Tuesday, about the use of city facilities. So that question will be answered as well.
I know that the seniors had temporarily lost the use of Perry Park, and we were able to get that back to them. That's why, in part, I was asking the question if some public organizations like that would end up being displaced as a result of some of these cuts.
Yeah, this would not be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
This is not that, but, but keep in mind that with the health crisis, very first thing we did was shut down the 3 senior centers. I mean, with that population being particularly at risk, with ban on gatherings, that's probably going to be one of the last facilities that we wind up, opening and encouraging. So, when we talk about we don't know exactly what normal looks like, that may be an area where we'll work more closely with each of these health districts or do more virtual or more individualized type senior services.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a whole different question.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Nguyen has a question, please.
So regarding these waivers for events, I thought last year they were eliminated. Is this something we have to do every year to eliminate? We have to discuss this every year to eliminate the year's events, or is this going to be like?
Yeah, there were some minor modifications last year. The amount of the subsidy was changed on certain events. They used to be called signature events, where basically there was no charge for any staff time and there were no charges for any facility reservations. We still have a few like that, but last year, and I don't have it in front of me, maybe Marnie does, but there was certain amount of the subsidy was removed for certain events. What we're saying now is that, also with, the concern about community events, although, these are outdoors, the risk is less than if everyone's gathered indoors. Some of them are already being canceled. July 4th, the fireworks have been canceled. The run has been canceled that Mr. Ward does. Springfest, I believe, well, not Springfest. There was one other one that was recently announced that it was canceled. That if these events are going to happen, that it's not going to be something where the city loses money, the city incurs extra costs, that they're going to have to be done in a way, if this budget decision package is adopted, where there's going to have to be a funding source or the event's going to have to be changed so that it doesn't involve fee waivers or staff time. I mean, it's something that a number of cities are looking at. Carson, that has way more events than we have, that's one of their recommendations, that they go into cost recovery as opposed to having a continued subsidy. So anyway, hope that helps.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands, Marnie.
Okay. The popular one to ask questions about was decision package number 25. So Commissioner Johnson asked, just confirming that further Moss Adams studies are on hold at this time. Commissioner Samples asked, though the city has experienced great difficulty in implementing some of the recommendations of Moss Adams, this external input is critical to the city of Redondo Beach becoming efficient. The reason many other cities do not need such a resource as is used for the justification of this reduction. Even with continuing Moss Adams oversight, it is evident that the 3 identified departments struggle with moving forward under this new set of budget cuts. It is reasonable to conclude that forward progress would be impeded unless there is some external oversight, for example, Moss Adams. And then, I had written down. No, and Chairman Solomon, how would the Moss Adams savings of $100,000 be split among departments to meet the 15%? My understanding is the cost is now split between 3 departments. So Moss Adams is still doing work through June 30. Right now, they're taking a look at two of our city policies, our policy on internal service funds and our policy on CalCard. CalCard's our city purchasing card. Unfortunately, they are moving really slowly on these policies. They came on site for interviews in February and said they would have drafts back to us by the end of March. Since then, they've kept promising they're going to have the drafts to us at the end of the coming month. So the latest, they say they'll get us the drafts by the end of May. So we're sure hoping we can get this wrapped up by June 30, but it's not staff holding up the process. Doing this elimination would save the city $100,000. That's $33,500 from the city clerk's budget, $33,500 from my department's budget, and $33,000 from the city treasurer's budget. So those do go into each of our three 15% cuts.
Commissioner Conroy has a question, please. You're muted, Jason. There you go.
Gotcha. Okay. A couple things real quick. So if they're costing us $100,000 per year, are they more than making up for that $100,000 with savings and recommendations that we're implementing that it's saving the city money? And then my second question real quick is, do we have the availability to maybe have them do an audit every other year?
Second question first, of course, that's an option of council. It's being recommended to just eliminate it on an ongoing basis. But council certainly has the option to say, let's just put it on hold for 1 year and come back to it the next year. As far as savings, this is an internal controls audit, and I do recall when Mark Stranka told a former commissioner who was hoping that they were going to save us all kinds of money. I had to fully agree with him when he answered, typically internal controls audits would fully implemented recommendations would actually probably increase your costs because you want so much segregation of duties. You would have more staff on so that these duties could be segregated. So no, there aren't savings that would offset the cost.
And I believe I read somewhere in the documentation, there's a lot of documentation, that we're the only city in the South Bay that uses an outside audit firm. Is that correct, to your recollection?
For internal controls, yeah. I think our closest one is probably Culver City and then Santa Monica.
Okay, thank you.
Marnie, for the outstanding reports or the outstanding information, is that a deliverable that they must conclude to fulfill the contract, whether they do it before June 30th or after June 30th? Is that how we have the contract written, that it's a deliverable that it's a set cost and here you go? Or is it something where June 30th may come and go, and if they haven't finished it, then we lose all that work?
We'll make sure that it's taken care of. We have a purchase order for their contract. We'll basically ask council to carry that purchase order over. That'll finish out our 1920 funding.
It seems to me if we're able to, we shouldn't withhold any payments until they start delivering.
That we do. We actually do pay them for time spent, not just, like 1/12 of the contract amount or something. So we're not paying for something we're not getting.
Steve, did you have something?
No, thank you.
Beg your pardon?
No, thank you.
Eleanor, if I may just for a moment, for a point of clarification, I may have been remiss here. One of the comments, or some of the comments that we received through e-comment was on this decision package. Should we be, do we read those, or are they simply entered into the record or listed there?
So, well, I haven't received any e-comments. So the only thing we got was a blue folder item.
Earlier, when I looked at the e-comments, you had an e-comment from Sheila Lamb on several of the decision packages. This Moss Adams one being included, so perhaps it's just.
Are you talking about the e-comment at the city council meeting? Because there's not one here. I haven't
for
seen.
our public hearing here, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, because I remember she did have one in the city council.
I collected this off of, there are 10 comments here, collected this from e-comment for our meeting, but perhaps I'm misreading it. Okay. But as we're discussing these things, how have you been handling it? Have you been handling where the public comments toward the end of the meetings or as we go here?
Yeah, the e-comments is normally during, it should be when you're done with the discussion of that item.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. We're jumping around through different decision packages, so I'll hold off until towards the end there if we have any of your e-comments.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I don't see any hands raised.
But Eleanor, do we have any e-comments now or not?
No, I don't see any,
Okay.
Okay.
but I'll keep checking. I'm refreshing. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. Marnie, I don't have any other hands raised on that issue.
Okay, so decision packages 26 to 31 are all about harbor reductions. So Chairman Solomon had some questions about harbor in general. A news story indicated Polly's has deferred rent payments, not paying rent. What is the dollar figure impact to lease revenues from harbor leases being deferred by percentage of previous fiscal income or dollar amount? Harbor leases have CAM charges and maintenance fee charges. Have these been suspended as well as base rent? The Pier Association charges for special events and cleanings to leaseholders. Do we know if these charges have been suspended or deferred? So all these decision packages are to help with the Harbor Enterprises structural deficits brought to us again by COVID-19. City Council has approved harbor rent deferrals. Currently, the deferrals are for April, May, and June rents. And the total amount of the deferrals comes to about $1.25 million. When they do pay, we'll be receiving just the base rents, since these businesses have been closed or severely limited in their operations. Their CAM charges, maintenance fees, and Pier Association dues have also been deferred. So then,
Yeah, so I can maybe add on to that. So what we have is at the waterfront, with the city being the landlord, tenants there, having rent obligations to the city. Initially, there were requests to waive rent, and these were taken up in closed session because they're lease negotiations, And so basically we're looking at it basically 1 month at a time. It's a city council decision. I don't think I'm violating any Brown Act privilege by saying that, the rent's been deferred, meaning that they still have to pay. You just sort of tack it on to future payments. They're handled on a case-by-case basis, but the city as property owner, we feel for the tenants there. One of the things that we're going to be doing shortly is working to reopen the pier. It's something that there's been basically a countywide ban on piers being opened, but last Tuesday, there was a health order that said that retail, I'm sure you all saw this and have read about it, retail could now begin to open, meaning that they could open at 50% capacity. Still does not at this point, unless something came out this evening, still does not allow restaurants or bars to function with in-person dining or visits other than for takeout and delivery. So one of the things that I'm working towards is revising the emergency order to basically segregate the pier, to say that now that retail is allowed, that we will make it easier access to get to restaurants, to get to the retail establishments there, and that the other parts of the pier would remain closed per the county order, not per the city's order, but per the county order. So it's our hope that as the county works towards receiving a variance from the statewide stay-at-home order, that we will very soon have in-restaurant dining or the ability to do outdoor dining, which we've had some requests for and a number of cities are looking at. So really feel for the businesses throughout the town, but in particular those that are at the waterfront, because their ability to operate has really been severely limited by the county's order. But yeah, that's being looked at on kind of a month-by-month basis.
Yeah, I recognize it's a difficult question to ask, as a lot of this is closed session negotiations that can't be discussed. But the idea being, if the payments have been deferred and it's been added on to the back end of the lease, depending upon the length of the lease, we might recapture some of that lost revenue within the next fiscal year. So when you forecast what your lease revenues are going to be and the impact on it, it might be that yes, we're taking that as a loss in fiscal 2019, 2020, but able to recapture that in fiscal 2020, 2021, which is the budget forecast that we're working on now. So it's my experience with a lot of the lease holders, not just in Redondo, but around the country, that they are taking it where it's either being recaptured all at once in 3 months, which is not the greatest thing for business owners, and they have a hard time doing that, but rather on the back end of the lease where I'll give you 50% now, but you're going to have 100% added on for 3 months at the end of this. And not at market charges, at your current charges. There's a measure in the House today that got passed modifying the Paycheck Protection Program that broadened the ability of business owners to spend money on things other than payroll. So it didn't have to be the 75% in order for it to be forgiven, and then spreading out the length of time in which those loans can be forgiven from 2 years to 5 years. So that might free up some more capital if some of the business owners down there have been able to secure those loans, to apply that more of that towards lease payments and not payroll, where their payroll may have been trimmed, and free up capital for them to be able to meet lease obligations as part of our discussions. So thank you. Commissioner Chun had a question, please.
Yeah, so that was kind of a little bit of my earlier question on this. So if it's 1.25 million, average $416,000 a month for 3 months, what's in our 2021 budget? What are you budgeting? Is it 100% recoverable, or are you budgeting 80% of the harbor revenue? I mean, what's the budget for that?
Well, now, just as we talked about with the taxes at the beginning of our discussion, if we get these payments within 60 days of the fiscal year end, they will still be booked to this current fiscal year. So we're really just looking at the 2021 payments that we would receive.
So basically you're saying 2021 is essentially
July, June, yeah.
inclusive of these payments, essentially.
So the way it's set up now, if nothing changes, which, who knows if it will or not, we could expect those payments within 60 days of the end of our fiscal year and book it all to fiscal year 1920.
Okay, so basically, if these do not come in as 100% within 60 days, then 2021 budget is different then.
I would assume so. But on the other hand, if we're not open, to a greater extent, then that may be offset by lower revenue in 2021 than we would have anticipated. So, but yeah, I mean, budget is always a guessing game, and this year, way more so, especially with timing coming into play so much. So we will be completely monitoring and adjusting the budget as needed.
So what's the average? What's the monthly total rent pre-COVID-19 per month?
Couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I think the Harbor Commission is really going to delve into this. I mean, it was Budget and Finance and the Harbor Commission that the council wanted to have special meetings relative to the budget.
Okay.
This is part of the reason, not that we can't answer your question, but the Harbor Director, the Waterfront and Economic Development Director will be, at that next meeting for the Harbor Commission.
So, Marnie or Joe, when we were having discussions at council, or when the council was having discussions a short time ago, and we were looking at what our shortfalls were for 2019, 2020, this may have happened afterwards. It was estimated that our hit was going to be a total of about 5.1 million. Is that something, lost lease revenues, that was incorporated into that global figure? Were those part of it, or no, because that hadn't been done yet?
Actually, completely different reason. It's no, that 5.1 million was just general fund, and these harbor leases are in the harbor enterprise, in the harbor tidelands and harbor uplands funds. Okay,
so there's a separate shortfall that we're looking at for the harbor enterprise, and that estimate is, as far as the leasehold payments alone is considered, or is the 1.125 million, or that's what you're looking at, the 1.125 for the next fiscal? So I'll make sure I understood that correctly.
I just asked the Waterfront and Economic Development Director your question, what's the total amount of the deferral, and that's the number he gave me.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands right now. If you wanted to continue, please, Marnie.
Sure. Decision package number 29 is about the Harbor Patrol staffing. Chairman Solomon asked about the reduced staffing of the Harbor Patrol boat. Currently, LA County picks up the slack here with mutual aid. Will the county cover our service on days or nights when the service is dark? Does the county charge us for the coverage? How will the loss in harbor affect ISF charges to the Harbor Enterprise Fund? Will the police boat continue to be fully staffed? Can the police boat handle any of the emergency calls coming out when the Harbor Patrol is dark? Then Commissioner Samples asked.
Marnie?
Yeah.
I think Commissioner Solomon's questions pretty much cover what I'm asking there. So if you just want to cover that, we're good.
And pretty much I'm not. I am actually going to defer this to the fire chief's budget response report. He's been asked by council to go into more details on what a 1/3 cut would look like, and would police play into it and all that. So the budget response report should be coming out. If it doesn't sufficiently answer your questions, I'll hold on to them and ask those specifically at the get them answered in time for your June meeting. But
Thanks, Marnie. I'd just like to go ahead, Joe.
I can take a stab at some of those issues that were raised. One is that I know that the county fire department and county beaches and harbors, they are looking at even larger reductions than we are in terms of the discussions that I've held with beaches and harbors, as well as what I've heard about county fire. So any idea that they could kind of take over something that we're, kind of handing to them it's number one, probably doubtful that they would have the capacity to do that unless there was a payment out to them. So we'll have to obviously explore that. In terms of how that reduction could go into effect with Harbor Patrol, again, that gets back to the minimal staffing. That's something that we're going to have to, work through with the Firefighters Association. Some of the possibilities are there could be a season of the year where that service is not offered. There could be a time of the day that the service is not offered. It could become a daytime only type service where it wouldn't become a 24-hour operation. So those are all the things that we would have to sort through and potentially come to an agreement with. Easier said than done on this issue. But, it's all driven by a need to take some action to help those funds out. I mean, the other thing is that we now have the law enforcement presence on the water. We have also Harbor Patrol presence. Harbor Patrol is safety patrol, rescue, water safety. They previously had an authorization to do more of a law enforcement role. That is no longer an option in the same way that it had been before. So their Harbor Patrol is not armed. They don't have arrest powers. They don't have, the same enforcement authority that the police department has. Is there a possibility that those two operations could be merged? Again, it's probably possible. Is it likely to happen in the short term? More work will have to go into that. So there's a variety of different potential options that we're going to explore. So.
Okay, thank you, Joe. The chief said something that was pretty striking, where he said that there could be a situation where a call for help will not be answered. And that was a really striking thing to hear from the fire chief. So look forward to that response report. When it comes to the ISF charges, so you've got some personnel that are moving out of the harbor essentially there. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but Assistant City Manager Wasansky, Mike said that there would be a correlative reduction, but it wouldn't be seen in 2021. It would be seen in 21-22.
Right.
Did I hear that right?
Yep, sure did. So when we calculate the internal service fund charges, we take a look at the most recently completed fiscal year. So it wouldn't be until after 2021 actual expenditures are recorded. It would be based on that. And then also, as staffing levels are reduced, that does reduce internal service fund, some of the internal service fund charges, but on a percentage basis. So it's each department's or functions or, however low you go in the allocation, it's their percentage to the total. So if everybody's being cut the same amount, it doesn't really cut the internal service fund charges. But if they're being, if their staffing is reduced more percentage-wise than others, then yes, they will see a cut.
And are county lifeguards housed at the Harbor Patrol building down there?
Yeah.
They are. So if the building's going dark for a period of time, but it's not occupied, the county lifeguards would still be there. So we still have to operate that building. It's the lights are still on. To your point, Joe made earlier, the power's on, the lights, the lights are on. There's whatever other associated charges connected to that. Is that something that we pick up, or is that something that the harbor picks up in ISF charges, and is it charged to the county? How do we work out that sharing agreement?
Do you know, Joe? I don't know if they're there 24 hours a day. I know they're in the building, but I don't know.
Yeah, I believe
level.
seasonal. I'm not sure their level of staffing.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Johnson has a question, please.
Yeah, I need to say this quickly while I can. I didn't anticipate this. I'm on my work computer where I have my camera and my Zoom, and it's telling me I've been logged on for 15 consecutive hours, and it's going to log me off. So I don't know what happens then. I will try to log back in, but it's counting down to a couple minutes. And yes, it's the first time that I have sat in this chair for 15 consecutive hours.
You can call back in if you're unable to rejoin the Zoom. On the invitation, there is a phone number to call back in and participate in the meeting.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
Do you want to maybe take a 5-minute recess, or?
I think what's happening is that we have a practice that it doesn't want people working 15 hours, and it's not going to let me log back in immediately.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
You could also use a phone app, or use the same link on your telephone.
I'll see if I can get in. Thank you.
Okay, are you interested in taking a brief recess, Joe, for other reasons, or?
I'm gonna have to make I'm gonna leave for 5 minutes and come back, but you
Okay.
keep going.
Well, why don't we take a 5-minute recess with, Commissioner Johnson can check on how he can navigate that, and, Joe can take care of what he needs to take care of. So let's do a 5-minute recess and reconvene, let's say at 9:25, please.
Okay.
Oh, shoot. Where's the fair? So how did that switch? I don't know.
Because, we made sure it was on right beforehand.
Yes, I talked and everything, so that was really weird. And then they
Like,
asked me a
who else
question, I
can
said
press that?
something.
Who else
and
can
it-
press that button? Because it's
I don't
just
know.
on this computer.
That's what's weird. I mean, I couldn't press it on mine. It
Because
didn't show me.
it disappears, and so I don't see it anymore.
Oh.
Otherwise it would be up there on
Right.
the thing.
Right. That's really weird.
Yeah. Now, so if it is on mute, it's muting you, but not them, right?
It's muting the whole comp this
Well,
here.
here, but that's
But it's
only,
broad-
but that's only
They
you.
said I was broad, like they can hear me broadcasting. I mean, they can hear me on the channel 841.
But they can't,
They couldn't hear me.
but they can
Zoom-
hear themselves. It's
Yes.
only, so it really only affects you.
Yes,
And I
anybody
was kind of
here.
wondering that, like, before some of these meetings go, to where I hear everybody, like, when they're testing, and I don't hear you. That's because they haven't turned on there. Okay, now that makes sense. Now that now that it goes full circle, I can
Well,
know that.
I think they broke it up so that way we can test the Zoom part.
But I mean, if I ever hear them say, we can't hear you, then
Right.
I will immediately go
Look and see,
check that.
yeah. Look
Yeah.
and see the Zoom.
I could see you were gonna, like, start texting me or something. I'm going, what am I supposed to do?
Well, that's why I text Matt, and I'm like, how come, he goes, it's muted in there, to check there.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was like, oh,
Because you
okay.
know your microphone, because you can hear it.
Yeah,
Whether it's on or off.
yeah. I turned it off.
Okay. I went ahead and, like, right now on TV and on the web, I just cut to that picture, so
Oh,
none
okay,
of
maybe I
that's
can
up.
just leave it then. People are coming back, so I know. Where's on this one? Oh, you know what, no, you get a short one. If I can find, whoops. Let's see. see his phone number. I had to start my. Oh, great. Okay. I guess I'm not muted. Doesn't matter.
Eleanor, will we know if Steve was able to call back in?
I haven't seen an additional person in yet, so.
Okay, thank you.
And then when everybody's back, you'll have to reconvene.
Do a roll call.
Yeah, an emotion. It's me.
Okay, I think we have most everybody back that we can. Let's do a roll call back into session, please.
Okay, Commissioner Chun?
Here.
Commissioner Samples? Oh,
You're muted, Mel.
you're muted.
I'm here.
Commissioner Whittam?
You're
Whittam?
muted, Jerry.
Oh, you're muted also.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson? Okay, so he's not here yet. Commissioner Nugent?
Here.
Commissioner Conroy?
Here.
And Chairman Solomon?
Here. Okay, thank you. Hopefully we'll get Commissioner Johnson back. He'll work out his internet connection or be able to call back in. We'll make note when he does so, if he's able to. We're discussing the leases in the harbor. Seeing as how we're going to have the ability to have another discussion on the budget, I just want to take the temperature in the room to say that we would continue the discussion until say 10:30, then take some notes or information that we may like to see illuminated that we haven't submitted yet to staff, and then continue the discussion to June 11th, so we don't go until 1 o'clock in the morning here. So wanted to get an idea if everybody would be agreeable to something like that.
Yes, I would.
Me as well.
Me too.
Okay, so why don't we approach the meeting from that standpoint, if that's okay with you and Marnie as well, Joe? Okay, great. I want to be respectful of everybody's time and that we have going on, but also think that we're making some pretty good progress with the format of having the questions asked beforehand and then working our way through them. So let's please continue along that lines, please, Marnie.
Sure. The next one is decision package number 32. And Commissioner Samples asked, weren't these just replaced a few months ago? Why did the fire department not include 3-year extended warranty at the time of the purchase? So I asked the question of fire department, the equipment. Most of it was purchased back in 2014 and then some more in 2017. This request continues the extended warranty on those purchased in 2014 and now adds those that were purchased in 2017. So may have been thinking of the AEDs or something like that, but this has been a little while and it's just continuing.
Okay, yes, my mistake. I did confuse those with the AEDs. Got it.
Decision package number 33. Wasn't this, Chairman Samples asks, wasn't this included in the original budget request? If not, why? So this was a decision package in 2019-20. And the fire department had requested it to be ongoing funding. But it was recommended to council as one-time funding. So they needed to request it again. Again, they requested it as ongoing funding, and it is being recommended to council as one-time. Hopefully they can find a grant for it. But to put it in as ongoing at this juncture would just add to the structural deficit. So once again, it's just one time, and no chances are you'll see it again next year too. So it's not for fire department not asking. It's
Commissioner Samples has, you have a question?
Yeah, just reading the decision package. This is paramedic continuing education. It's required by law. I guess, well, I understand what you said. It just seems kind of confusing. It seems like it should just be embedded in the cost of the department, just like putting gas in a fire truck. I guess I'm just kind of slayed by the fact that it's a one-time charge and it keeps coming up and just raising flags.
And this is just the higher cost of the training and the equipment. Built into the core budget is a grant from Beach Cities Health District for these services. It's just that costs have increased beyond the grant amount.
Yeah, I get it. It's just, I kind of have to chuckle at it because whether it's paid for with a grant or not, we can't operate paramedics unless they get this training. And it just seems like it should be embedded in the budget, and we shouldn't have to even see this pop up and raise flags. Because this almost sounds like it's optional.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Marnie, number 40, if you're going to jump to that, we already answered that earlier on. This is kind of a repeat of that earlier question about IT equipment.
Exactly. I was going to skip it.
Okay. And 44, I know there's a budget response report that the council asked for, so we don't even have to talk about that one.
Commissioner Johnson also had a question. Not that he's here to hear the answer, but the rest of you, I'm sure, would benefit from it. So his question was regarding the 1-year extension of vehicle life. I know this is probably a good idea, but can you remind us when this was done last? Seems recently. Yes, it was recently. Last year, a decision package was done to extend the vehicle lives by 10%. So that meant some of the vehicles with longer lives got extended more than 1 year. Some of the vehicles with shorter lives didn't get extended at all. This particular version of their life extension extends the vehicles 1 year, regardless of what their estimated life is. I will go to one of your questions, Commissioner Samples, about whether they're automatically replaced at that time or not. And they are not. Usually they are, because we estimated the life correctly and they really are worn out by that time. But it is looked at on a case-by-case basis, looking at each vehicle and does it really need to be replaced now just because it's fully funded? And every once in a while, the answer is no, it wasn't used as much as we thought and it can last longer.
Marty, about the vehicle replacement fund, some changes there. We did a pretty deep dive last year on the vehicle replacement fund and the methodologies. About the same time that we got a bill from Public Works for an additional $110,000 to modify vehicles for natural gas. So has the methodology to determine a replacement cost been altered by the goals of the council to use more natural gas or electric vehicles to better estimate what these costs and savings are going to be?
Sure. I'm going to read your question anyway, okay?
Okay.
Commissioner Samples did have much the same question. So, okay. As with earlier questions, are vehicles being replaced on years of service or are they actually run out? In the case of police vehicles, this does not appear to represent the true cost. What are the additional costs for technology and equipment and further build out for items that often last beyond the useful life of the vehicle? Finally, as has been the case with at least the last 2 vehicle replacement purchases, the vehicle replacement fund is underfunded due to the change from conventional fueling to alternate fuels and leads to a net cost to the general fund. Where are the forecasts for this shortfall? So we answered the automatically replaced and then got clarification from Public Works on the other parts of the question. Sometimes equipment is taken out of the older vehicle and put into the new vehicle. But Public Works tells me that just as the vehicles are generally replaced at the time that they're expected to be, same with the equipment. It is usually worn out at the time the vehicle's replaced. But in those instances where it's not, it is moved to the new vehicle. As far as the green vehicles, the City Council has requested that whenever possible, the vehicles are replaced with green vehicles. So as time goes on, more and more of the replacement costs anticipate the change, and the replacement costs reflect that higher value. But those that have been in the replacement schedule for a longer period of time, we are going to run into that now and again where either they come to council and ask for an additional appropriation because not enough was set aside, or they're going to say, you know, it just isn't feasible at this time to replace it with anything but a gas-fueled vehicle. So we are going to see that now and again. Same for the equipment, namely in the police cars, but also Public Works has some equipment as well. the older or the vehicles that have been in the replacement fund for a longer period of time don't have those add-in equipment costs as part of the replacement value, but the more recently added vehicles do. So we're going to see a mixture for a little while, and then it'll all be built in to have those replacement costs include everything.
Okay, I'm sorry, you have something, Joe? I don't see any other hands on that, Marnie, if you want to move on to the next question.
Okay, we are done with decision package questions.
Okay, if I may, I do have a question that I didn't submit earlier about decision package 3. And then I wanted to briefly revisit something about one of the other decision packages. For decision package 3, I listened to Public Works Director Saman, TED talking about this the other day. It was a TED talk. This is something that's, it was a 7% increase for residential and a 14% increase for commercial, according to TED. It ends up getting billed going forward onto the next round of property taxes for residents and commercial building owners. One of the things, though, he said is that the money, it gets paid, the increase gets paid to, on the property tax bill, or to the assessor is what he said. And then it's transferred back to replenish the waste management fund, solid waste fund, excuse me. But I don't see where there are transfers out of the general fund and into the solid waste fund to replenish it. So I'm maybe just confused about how that works.
Yeah, it's not done with a transfer. The remittances that we get from the county for property tax actually break everything out. So we can see what is, base property tax, and we can see what's for waste hauling, and we can see what's for street landscaping and lighting. So we put them directly into the funds. We don't have to do a transfer.
Okay, so when we receive it from the county, it's directly, if it's a general fund item, directly in general fund, and if it's a separate fund like you're describing, solid waste fund, goes right in there. Okay, that's great. Yep. Thank you. Just talking a little bit more about, and I'll just only touch on it really briefly, the staffing for the decision packages related to the fire department. In our 18-19 CAFR, our overtime charges were almost $3.5 million. Our budgeted overtime charges are 1.9 to 2 million for overtime staffing. Then you look at the proposed budget for the fire department, and in each segment of the hours that are being proposed, they go up pretty dramatically. For service, it goes up from 13,936 to 19,000 hours. You got 99,000 hours to 111,000 hours, 26,000 hours to 59,000 hours. With all of these estimated increases in hourlies and a soft freeze in effect for those vacant positions, how do we reconcile the idea that we're still going to be around 2 million projected for overtime expense? It doesn't seem to match up based on what are looking at our projected increases. So
there's two pieces to that. The first is that the budgeted overtime is overtime that's meant to provide coverage for employees taking vacation or holiday or something like that. If the overtime is backfill for a vacant position, that actually, since we have savings in the regular salary lines, that savings there will cover the overage in the overtime. we don't specifically budget to provide overtime for vacant positions.
So for the budgeted vacant positions, the salaries that would otherwise be paid there are used to fund the overtime charges?
Yep.
Okay. So if a position is vacant versus deauthorized, it's still going to be funded.
Yep.
So deauthorized positions don't get funded.
Yeah, so,
Vacant positions still do.
yeah. So, if we were in a hiring mode and we had a vacant position come July 1st, chances are we're not going to get that person hired for a couple of months. So there's going to be overtime for the couple of months that would be filled by the savings in regular salary lines, and then it switches back to the regular salary lines used for this new employee and no overtime expenditures.
And so then for an uninitiated person like me, that's why we're able to budget only $2 million. I'll say only $2 million to, it's easy for me to say, for the overtime expense because it's already been budgeted for in a different area. If I'm understanding you correctly.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the second piece to that is I asked fire department about the number of hours from their performance measures, why it was changing, because I looked at the schedule for positions and they haven't added any positions. And so really 2021, the hours are calculated correctly. In the 1920 hours, everything was budgeted as if an employee was, or a position was for 2,080 hours, as opposed to 2,912, which is a 24-hour shift. So now in 2021, the 2,912 hours is used for all those 24-hour shifts. So it's really a correction, not an increase.
And that's why it's reflected as what looks like significant increases in hours in each segment are an adjustment to correct what may have been an error before.
Yep.
Okay. And that would also then reflect that there's not really going to be a significant change in overtime, but maybe remain about the same because we've already been incurring those hours or absorbing those hours, and we just haven't had them reflected.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Samples has a question, please. You're muted, Mel. There you go.
I'm now unmuted. Thank you. Thanks, Marnie. Yeah, I was just going to comment. We had this conversation when Chief Metzger visited about 1.5 years or 2 years ago. It turns out that filling a truly vacant but authorized position, the net cost for paying overtime versus the cost of filling that seat with a regular employee and all of their benefits works out to just about a wash. So that kind of makes sense. The thing that really concerns me in this is the number of vacant positions that we have and the amount of overtime that's going on. Everything that I've seen in the past says that if you work too many of these guys, too many days of overtime, or too long an extended period of time, you risk IOD injuries, which then makes that overtime problem worse, and it makes your staffing problem worse. That's the part that I worry about in some of these conversations. So just for the sake of conversation, I want to put that out on the table, and you know, if it works, if it's a valid conversation, I'd like to have it. But you know, net, if it's a vacant but not defunded position, we can fill it with overtime, and it doesn't cost us anything more than we were going to pay in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mel, and thank you, Marnie. I don't see any other hands up. If you wanted to move on to the next series of questions then unrelated to the decision packages.
Yeah, so we had a question on revenues. So that, we're on like page 71 of the budget document. So Commissioner or Chairman Solomon asked about, let's see, parking meter fees are expected to go down, but citations look almost flat. Are we expecting increased enforcement? So in asking the police department about parking citations and parking meter fees, they let me know all the variables they're dealing with in trying to estimate this revenue. So now during the COVID crisis, we're not ticketing for street sweeping, and we're not assessing late fees and penalties. And so there's the estimate of how long that will stay in place. Then they have the variable of the, much to your question about enforcement, the staffing levels in parking enforcement. Are they at a period of time where they're fully staffed or not? Then there's the installation of the parking meters that accept credit cards. As those are installed, we see an increase in the parking meter revenue, and we actually see a decrease in the parking citations, just because it's easier to pay the meter, and when you pay the meter, you don't get a citation. So they're doing their best at the estimates, trying to figure out the timing of how all these pieces are going to fit together. In the department sections,
I'm sorry, Marnie, just one more thing about the parking meters, if we can, please.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this has come up as a budget response report or not, but there's been discussion, and I know, Joe, you've been really diligent about this. If there's somehow, some way they closed off part of Catalina to allow for socially distant dining, or we closed off other streets, has there been an impact report on what that would mean to our parking revenues in those areas, where it hasn't been enough of a topic yet to really deep dive into that?
Yeah, we haven't really gotten that far into it. We're going to have a status report before the council on Tuesday. The issue really becomes, how long will it be before outdoor dining is even allowed? And then once it's allowed, how long will it be of interest before interior dining sort of gets back to normal? And so we have asked from the Riviera Village some kind of parameters for a plan that they would like to see. And I'm having regular conversations with other neighboring cities. We have the experience of the dining deck. I know how much effort went into planning that, to make it safe, to make it secure, to not create a situation where there's risk or liability. We've had some people say, hey, just put some sawhorses out and move the tables out into the street. There's no way we're going to move forward with a plan like that, as well intentioned as it is. It's just not safe. So we haven't done the more detailed study. We're still kind of getting the parameters of a plan together. There's some mixed feedback as well. Not all businesses like the idea of businesses occupying the street. For restaurants, that might work well. For other retail, it could potentially impede their activities and sales. So we're sort of far from a consensus that that's what's going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, a question then from Chairman Solomon. Financial services no longer encumbers a large sum for a bond issue that has now ended. Where were these funds then allocated or encumbered elsewhere in the budget? So they were not allocated elsewhere in the budget. When it was an appropriation in our department's budget, it was also a revenue. So it had no impact to fund balance. Now that it's gone from both sides as well. So again, even without it, there's no impact to fund balance. So there wasn't anything there to appropriate elsewhere.
Okay, thank you, Marty.
Then we had a question, I think it was part of another one, about police department. And, from Commissioner Samples on the police department reductions. Part of the question is that their 2021 budget represents a 1% increase over 1920. So the police department budget, a few things come into play. They, of course, pay a very large portion of the unfunded liability. So they're seeing that increase. They have recently agreed to MOUs, and so salary increases are reflected in the 2021 budget. And then from the 1920 budget, there are some one-time appropriations, some of it grant funding, that are built into that number that are not included in the 2021. And then we end up with our increase small because it's netted out.
Thanks, Marty. That makes more sense. I mean, you've got to appreciate that the police department is the largest single budget department that we have. So yep. A 1% for them is probably like 12% for your department. So
yeah, when we first calculated the cuts, looking at just that 5% number for them, I was like, wow, yeah. That's a big number just at 5%.
Yeah, or even like I was talking about here, 1 or 1.5% is a lot for them, yep. But it's even more for everybody else to try to make up the difference. But thank you.
Then for library budget, Chairman Solomon had a question on theirs, much the same. Library is showing an increase of 3%. Is this due to ISF charges or some other obligation? And the library, they're kind of on the other hand where a 3% number is nothing like police department's 3% number, but their CalPERS unfunded liability increase is significant in a budget their size. If you look at the line items of their budget, you'll see that medical insurance has increased quite a bit, and that is just either employee changes with different family size, or the existing employees having changes to their medical insurance. And then again, that's has the same comparison with the one-time appropriations. Again, some of it grant funding, some of it their library materials in the 1920 budget, but excluded from the 2021. So that kind of brings us to their 3%.
Thank you, Marty.
And believe it or not, that took us through all the questions.
Well, that's great. We might have an earlier night than we thought.
Yeah, don't call it early.
I understand, yes. Mr. Samples has a question, please.
Well, I just, we have a blue folder item number, let's see, they're both labeled item J1. This is the one that is the budget response report. There is an item here that suggests that we might be able to save $500,000 by converting a fire engine to a fire rescue unit. We probably don't need to have a big discussion about that here, but when we get to a point where we're talking about recommendations to the council, I think it's worthy of having a conversation there. You know, in just as the very highest level, I worry that if we take a fire engine out of service and move a captain and engineer down to a paramedic unit, we would probably have the only paramedic squad in the country that's staffed by a fire captain and fire engineer, and that's probably working out of class, and that creates a whole series of problems that Joe gets to have fun with the union. So that's my only comment on the one thing other than the decision packages that we had in front of us.
I don't see sorry, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just a comment related to that. Yeah, you raise a good point, Mr. Samples. However, as you know, there's many times, you know, people making career decisions, retiring, moving on. I don't think that would be a forever condition. That would be, you know, as one of the more senior captains retires, you could, you know, move people around and sort of get people more appropriately classified into positions where they staff the.
Right. I think my only caveat in this is it's not an instantaneous decision. It's not something that we could just implement on July 1st. There's a lot more behind the scenes.
Right. And the same thing that we said about constant staffing and the need to negotiate. Yeah. Same thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Eleanor, did you have something for us, please?
Yeah, I have a 1E comment. I don't know if you're ready for that.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So Lee Kohler, it is quite shocking that the city would consider reducing harbor patrol, excuse me, by 33%, leaving times where no one is available to respond to emergencies on the water, such as a boater on the rocks or a fisherman washed off the breakwater. These emergencies don't follow a schedule. Lee Kohler, Redondo Beach resident and boater. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. I'd ask at this time if there's any other questions that you have at this time for any of the commissioners of Marnie. I'm not seeing any hands. Marnie, I have a question to follow up with for the next time that we meet, if I could, please.
Of course.
Our self-insurance program, that fund, there's a negative balance of just over $10 million in there. It has been a pretty dramatic swing for the last, say, 5 to 6 years, where there used to be a surplus, or there used to be a positive fund balance in there, and now there's the negative of $10 million in change. If you could explain to us now or at our next meeting, just get us an idea of what's that is a product of? Is it, there would look like there was a settlement, which maybe we can't talk about, but just trying to get a handle on how we have one of our fund balances at negative almost just over 10 million.
Yeah, we can do that at the next meeting, and that way I can get you the details, because it's not 1 year, one item. It
Sure.
has grown every year.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's why, yeah, I think that'd be great if you could handle that for us for the next meeting. What I would suggest at this point is for us to take the information we received tonight, distill it down. We might have some additional questions leading into the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, prepare what we would like to forward to the city council. Unless there's something specific that you find, any of the commissioners find as an urgency that we'd really like to have the city council take up at their next discussion. So looking around the room, is there anybody that would like to weigh in on that? Okay, seeing no takers. Mr. Samples, yes, sir.
Sorry about that. I don't have anything that I believe is so urgent. We need to send it to the council for their next meeting. I think it can wait until our next meeting so that we can actually boil this down. I want to thank everyone for this. I think this was a great way to do this meeting. It went way longer than I think any of us thought it would last, but I think it's been good, and I do appreciate Marnie, all of your work. Joe, I appreciate your participation and your insight into this, and I hope even in the brief conversations that we've had, we've given you some things to think about. So that's my comment for the evening.
Okay, thank you.
You have, and I wanted to suggest, I mean, if this format worked, we can use it again for your next meeting. If you, even tonight, think of questions that, gee, I wish I would have asked that question, just email it to Marty, and we'll, it helps us get you the information you need, by being prepared. And, I've worked places before where, people, you ask them, do they have any questions? And they say, no, I'll save my questions for the meeting. And they think their job is to make the staff dance. And, I didn't get that sense at all from you. So I want to thank all of you for your questions and the tone of this meeting. I really do appreciate it. I want to acknowledge all of you.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes, Joe, thank you. That's one of the things that I think was very different about this meeting. The fact that we were actually asked in advance, we were given a lot of material up front. We were asked in advance and we were given a timeline. I think it made this meeting actually go better. And our questions, I think, were better questions, and your answers were better answers. So I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. I think as a format, it helps. There's obviously some things that are going to come up at the time. But to have it work out this way, I agree, was much improved. So at this point, absent sending some urgent message to the council about one of the items that we've discussed tonight, I'd like to request a motion to receive and file the report, and then we would continue our discussion at the next meeting.
Well, do we receive and file this, or do we continue it to the next meeting in order to keep it open?
Well, I had a discussion with Eleanor about that. What do you recommend, please, Eleanor?
Yeah, this would be a receive and file because this is not a public hearing. So they'll bring it back as an item on the next on your next meeting.
And you can receive and file that too.
Correct.
I move to receive and file.
And as food for thought, can everybody consider? My initial feeling is that due to our meeting on the 11th coming really on the heels or anticipating only a few days later, the city council meeting where they have to adopt a budget, I would be in favor of the idea, as Marnie suggested earlier, of our comments and suggestions being included as part of a budget response report rather than a letter to the council that we would mull over and try to perfect the language of. So if everybody's amenable to that, that's the direction that I would like to visit for when we do make recommendations to the council at our next meeting. Seeing no objections, I'll take that as an assent, and we'll find out at the next meeting. So we'd like a motion to receive and file the report, if we could, please.
You already have it.
All right, a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay,
Second.
we'll do a roll call vote then, please. Eleanor?
Commissioner Chun,
Aye.
Commissioner Samples,
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson absent, Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner Conroy,
Aye.
and Chairman Solomon.
Aye. Thank you, Eleanor. Our next item on the agenda are member items and referrals to staff. I'll ask Commissioner, Joe, you have a question, please?
Yeah, actually, I do. I wanted to ask, about your next meeting on June 11th. We focused pretty heavily on operations tonight. We didn't really talk at all about capital. Just thinking ahead for your next meeting, would it be helpful to have a presentation on capital? Do you feel like the joint meeting that you had with Public Works already kind of gave you enough insights into the capital program?
Or they didn't get it?
Yeah, we had that canceled.
Oh, that didn't happen. Okay. Okay.
So then I think you're right, Joe. I think that maybe we focus a little bit on capital at the next meeting. I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask if there's any other topics that you sort of know right now that you'd like to have covered. This would be a good time to, talk about it so that, we can kind of better be prepared for next time.
Okay. I've had that one item, and I'm not thinking of anything other than that right now. I would encourage everyone to then go ahead and utilize this new wonderful toolbox that you provided to us and email something like that as part of a question to Marnie in anticipation of that meeting, if that's all right, Joe?
Sure.
Okay, so let's do it that way, please. Anything else for this topic? Okay, so we'll go to member items and referrals to staff. Commissioner Woodham, do you have anything?
I don't, no.
Commissioner Nguyen?
No.
Commissioner Conroy?
No.
Commissioner Samples?
I do not.
And Commissioner Chun?
None.
I have one thing, Marnie. I don't know if it'd be something to address now, but for the future, I would like to have the opportunity to discuss creating, if we can, and I know we're talking a lot about staffing, and this would not take up staffing time, a subcommittee to enable a couple of members of the commission to discuss CalPERS and some different theories about how we can manage or review or attack our CalPERS ongoing liabilities. I know that Commissioner Woodham has done some of a dive into this, and I know that Commissioner Johnson has also. I think that could be helpful, and when we're all really strapped for time, when you talk about staff time, to take advantage of some of these volunteer opportunities for members of the community, like the members of the commission, to dive into that at a separate time that doesn't require a meeting, an official meeting, but can be brought and have some information generated to discuss at a meeting. So is that something, Marnie, creating a subcommittee or having that discussion that we agendize and have a discussion about the subcommittee? Or is it something that we're empowered to do or not do? My understanding is that we are, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I would think it should be an agenda item for you to discuss.
Correct.
We can.
Yeah, we might want to ask the city clerk in terms of, there's different ways of creating subcommittee. It's an ad hoc subcommittee with a limited term, then you're not triggering the Brown Act. But if it's an ongoing committee, even if it's not a quorum, then there's potential Brown Act implications. So,
okay,
Eleanor.
You want to have it under a quorum, and you need to discuss it in a sense of who is going to be on the committee.
Yeah, I think maybe what we should do is agendize it for the next meeting.
Right.
Okay.
if
Yeah.
that works for you.
That's what I was hoping for, to get some information about it and see how we can do it, if we can do it, and if it's a wise thing to do that way. Okay, I want to thank everybody. My 2 cents is that everybody, for members of the public, for those playing at home that are still there, for everybody on the commission, members of the staff and elected officials here, all of the people who are participating in this event on the commission are volunteers to the city, unpaid volunteers who take time away from their homes, their families, their work, and their leisure activities in order to try and make Redondo a better place and to contribute and volunteer their time. So I thank all of you, not just on this commission, but every commission for doing that. Because the level of participation in this commission, the way that people come prepared, come with questions, people show up is really, really something. And I know I really appreciate everybody being here every week, week in and week out like this. So I thank you for that. I'll get off my soapbox and ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Second.
We'll do one more roll call vote to adjourn then till our meeting on June the 11th. I'll go ahead and do a roll call, please, Eleanor.
Commissioner Chun,
Aye.
Commissioner Samples,
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson absent, Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner Conroy,
Aye.
Chairman Solomon.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.